Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description.
She had a terrible and realistic dream. Sakura wanted to cover her eyes with her palms so as not to see him, but her hands wouldn't obey. Just like the rest of her body. She was a hostage of her subconscious, a silent witness, forced to look at something that was scary to even think about. The girl understood that it was a dream and desperately tried to wake up. It seemed to her that any minute she would open her eyes and find herself in her bed. She would hear her mother calling her for breakfast. After basking a bit, she would look out the window and admire the bustling Konoha. But the nightmare did not stop. Over and over again, the girls had played horrible images, Rasengan and Chidori colliding, killing their bearers. Suddenly, Sakura's eyes flew open. Her heart was pounding as if it was trying to break through her ribs. Her legs were numb, her temples were throbbing. Finally woke up, Kakashi said. Still not fully recovered from sleep, Sakura looked at the sky for a few seconds, illuminated by the scarlet rays of the sun. Her palms were sweaty, and it felt like snakes were crawling in her stomach. The girl could not remember what she had dreamed, but she knew for sure, there was something bad there. The young Kunoichi looked at her mentor, hoping to see the usual indifference and calm in his eyes. But his gaze only increased her anxiety. Somewhere deep inside, a nasty premonition stirred. Kakashi looked at her with longing. Sakura's soul sank into her heels. She asked, "Where are Sasuke and Naruto?" "They have come together in their final battle to settle everything once and for all," the teacher said quietly, looking down. It was as if a thin needle had been pierced into the girl's heart, causing unbearable pain. Of course, deep down she had already guessed everything. But that didn't make it any easier. Tears began to well up in her eyes. "You swore to protect them. To be as strong as they are. And now you sit here and whine while they fight to the death," the girl's inner voice scolded. Sakura bit her lip, wiped her eyes with her tattered, dirty sleeve and said, "We need to find them before they kill each other." "I don't think that's a good idea," Kakashi countered. "You've seen how strong they are. I don't want you to get hurt too." "But we can't abandon them," the girl exclaimed angrily and felt a tear run down her cheek. "Sakura, pull yourself together. This is their fight, and we shouldn't interfere. Let them finish it themselves." Sensei hesitated and looked away, whatever the outcome. However, the girl did not like this situation at all. In addition to the nasty premonition, anger was added. "I'm not going to sit back. They might need my help. Stay if you want." "I'll go." Haruno tried to get up. However, it was not that easy. Her chakra had not yet recovered, so she could not heal herself. But the anticipation of the inevitable was much worse than the pain. "You're still without strength. Even if you want to, you won't be able to help them." "I'll still try," the girl said, gritting her teeth. "Naruto would have definitely come to the rescue, so it's my duty to do the same." Kakashi didn't answer. Sakura took a deep breath, gathered her strength, and stood up. The sun had almost disappeared behind the mountains. Its last rays illuminated the eerie cocoons hanging on the divine tree. All of her comrades were in them. "In the end, if they kill each other, who will dispel Tsukiyomi?" the girl asked quietly. Taking one last look at the horrific scenery, Sakura turned away and walked in the opposite direction. "Hey," the sensei called out to her, "I can't leave you alone. Help me up." The girl felt a little relief and a pang of guilt that she had snapped at Kakashi. She went up to the teacher and helped him up. "Thank you," Sakura muttered. "They are as dear to me as they are to you," he said, "but I still think Naruto and Sasuke wouldn't want us interfering." The mentor got it much worse than she did. During the journey, Kakashi had to be held back, which made their speed unforgivably slow. They both knew where the destination was. The Valley of the End. No doubt Naruto and Sasuke were heading there to put a stop to it. Haruno and Hitaki moved all night, and the closer they got to the valley, the more anxious the girl became. They barely spoke. Words were not necessary, because it was clear that their thoughts and fears were about the same thing. Despite the extreme fatigue and pain, the teacher and student did not stop for a second. When the rays of the rising sun finally touched the treetops, Sakura and Kakashi reached the edge of the forest, which ended in a cliff. They exchanged glances. "It's suspiciously quiet here," said the teacher. Sakura didn't answer. Holding her breath, she slowly walked to the edge, and then gasped. The statues of Madara and Hashirama were smashed to the ground. The girl began to look around the ruins and finally saw them. The boys were lying by the river. Both had lost their arms. Her heart sank. Because of the height, Sakura couldn't see if the boys were alive. She quickly jumped off the cliff and headed towards them. "Sasuke. Naruto." But no one answered. Sakura made one last dash, fell to her knees and pressed her ear to her lover's chest. The heart was not beating. "No. This can't be," the girl muttered. With a sharp movement, she turned to Naruto and did the same. Haruno closed her eyes and began to listen, desperately hoping to hear a heartbeat. And suddenly she heard a weak, barely noticeable knock. "Alive?" Sakura whispered. And, having mobilized all her remaining strength, the girl began resuscitation efforts. This was the second time in recent times that she had to save Naruto's life. However, this time the task was much more difficult. Her chakra was almost exhausted. Sakura desperately tried not to think about the dead body of her loved one lying nearby. She had to help her friend. She knew all the necessary actions by heart: scan the body, identify damage, heal wounds. And as soon as the girl put her palms to Naruto's chest, he spoke up. "Sakura-chan," Uzumaki said hoarsely. "Shut up. Save your strength, I'm trying to save you." The boy started coughing. 2 streams of blood ran from his nose and mouth. It became clear, her actions were useless. 13 ribs were broken, the lungs were punctured in 3 places and were rapidly filling with fluid, the liver and spleen were torn. In addition, her friend had lost too much blood. Something broke inside the girl, but she did not give up hope. "I'll patch you up now, Naruto." "Don't worry," she said, feeling a twinge of guilt at how false her voice sounded. "Sakura-chan, don't, this is probably my end." "I'm sorry, I promise not to give up." The guy started coughing again. His face, already distorted by the beatings, twisted in pain. The teacher's hand fell on the girl's shoulder as he finally came down. Naruto gathered the rest of his strength, took a deep breath and hoarsely muttered. "Kakashi-sensei, take away Sasuke's Rinnegan. Please save everyone." "Without the tailed beast chakra, this is impossible," he replied. "I know I'm putting an unbearable burden on you. But we couldn't cope." The eyes of the ever-cheerful boy began to fill with tears. The kunoichi took Naruto's hand and quietly promised. "We'll think of something." "Yes, Naruto. Don't worry about everyone. You can rest now," the teacher added in a calm, soothing voice. "Thank you, Sakura-chan, Kakashi-sensei." And, giving them his last smile, Naruto Uzumaki closed his eyes, plunging into eternal darkness. The world spun. It felt like the air had been squeezed out of her lungs. The girl reached for Sasuke's hand, squeezed the boy's hands with all her might, and bowed her head. A loud, unnatural scream erupted from Sakura's chest. It was impossible. It shouldn't have happened. "We're late," Kakashi said quietly. These words made the pain even worse. It felt like thousands of explosive seals were exploding in Sakura's chest. It became difficult to breathe. Sensei sat down next to her and pulled her into his arms. The girl, choking on tears, buried her face in her mentor's shoulder. He put his hand on the back of her head and said in a trembling voice. "Forgive me, Sakura. I should have come earlier and stopped them." He hugged the pink-haired girl and tried his best to hold back his emotions. "You can't be weak, you can't show tears. Shinobi are not allowed to give free rein to their feelings." The man had assumed that this would be the outcome, and deep down he knew that he could not influence it. But did that make it any easier? He failed again. He lost his friends again. No, Sasuke and Naruto were more than that. Kakashi lost his sons. Memories of his student's childhood flashed through his head like lightning. Training, missions. The noodles he treated the eternally hungry Naruto to in Ichiraku. cold, distant Sasuke, so much like Kakashi, reminded him of himself in his youth. It was even strange to remember that time now. As if it had happened in someone else's life. These children freed him from the depths of darkness when it seemed that nothing could help. Thanks to Team 7, Kakashi felt the taste of life again. Of course, nothing could heal his guilt over Rin and Obito. However, Sasuke, Naruto and Sakura managed to fill the gaping hole in his seemingly stone heart. The young kunoichi, who by all laws of justice should have been destined to live a happy life, was now sobbing inconsolably on her sensei's shoulder. The shinobi world was too far from the word justice. This simple truth had burned an unhealing wound in his soul since his youth. Kakashi wanted to disbelieve in this and not see the pain anymore, but the cruel reality constantly reminded him of itself. "Look at them, you screwed up again," the inner voice said. "This is your curse, to watch your loved ones die and be powerless in the face of death." But there was no time for self-flagellation. There was a much more serious problem to solve. A crazy idea appeared in Kakashi's head, but he did not voice it yet. "Sakura, you have to transplant my Rinnegan, just like Naruto said." But the girl seemed not to hear. "Why did it all end like this?" Sakura asked breathlessly. "We almost won." "Why?" Kakashi had no answer to that question. He wanted to somehow console her, to find the right words. But all he could do was curse fate for such an outcome and the burden that now fell on their shoulders. However, a true shinobi had no right to surrender. Guy, although seriously injured, was still alive. Tsunade-sama and the other Kage were also alive. After all, everyone he knew was on the divine tree. The life of every survivor of the war now depended on Sakura and Kakashi. He repeated his request again. "We must gather our courage. For them. And for the world. We don't have much time. The eternal Tsukuyomi will gradually destroy everyone caught in it." The kunoichi freed herself from Sensei's embrace and said, sobbing, "You said yourself that we can't do anything without the tailed beast's chakra. Surely, Sasuke's jutsu that trapped the beasts in stone prisons has dissipated. Do you think they will help us if we manage to find them?" "No, I don't think so. With the Rinnegan I could subdue them, but it's too risky, and it would take a long time." Tears stopped flowing from Sakura's eyes. The girl gathered her willpower into a fist and began to listen attentively. Kakashi continued. "Now you will transplant the Rinnegan into me. Then we will bury Sasuke and Naruto here, in the Valley of the End. I think this is the most honorable end for them. And after that, we will restore our strength a little, get some food and begin the plan." The man tried to speak calmly, not to show his anxiety. What he had planned was insane. Moreover, Kakashi didn't really believe that they would succeed. He turned his gaze back to the dead bodies of his former students. The blood that flowed from the stumps of Sasuke and Naruto's arms dried and merged into a single line. How symbolic, thought the teacher, finally they are not chasing each other, but rather seem to be holding hands. "Sakura, I think they've finally made peace and are now looking at us with hope," Kakashi said quietly. "We mustn't let them down." "Yes," the girl agreed, "they shouldn't." The teacher nodded. "Okay. Are you ready for the transplant?" "Give me a couple more minutes," Sakura asked, turning away. Kakashi didn't rush her and decided that she needed to be alone. In truth, the sensei couldn't bear to continue looking at his students. Just yesterday he had watched the triumphant reunion of the team, and today he would be burying most of it. The sun had already risen above the valley. Clouds began to appear from behind the rock. Birds flew across the sky as before, and the wind caressed the grass and leaves of the trees. The world continued to live and did not even suspect that its inhabitants could very soon come to an end. Kakashi walked slowly to the almost dry river and washed his face. Then he filled his flask with water. His stomach had been empty for several days. There was no time to think about food in a war. For a moment, the man turned around again to look at the boys. Sakura gave in to her emotions. She touched her lips to Sasuke's forehead and pressed herself against the dead boy with all her might. Poor girl. She loved him no matter what. Will the girl recover from this? Unlikely. Kakashi-sensei, Sakura called, "I'm ready. Let's get started." A feeling of painful déjà vu washed over him. Nearly 18 years had passed since he had received the Sharingan. Once again, Kakashi was destined to take something that should not be his. Once again, in a war, he was given a trophy he had not asked for. The legacy of a great, dead clan. After all, Sasuke, unlike Obito, will never return to life. But Kakashi would think about the Uchiha clan ceasing to exist forever later. He approached Sakura and sat down next to her. The girl's face was swollen from tears, but she was no longer crying. Her gaze was focused and serious. However, as always when the matter became truly important. The procedure took only a few minutes. When the Rinnegan was finally in the left eye socket, a sharp pain burned through my head and tears mixed with blood began to flow down my cheek. "Damn," he muttered, pressing his palm to his new eye. His head spun from the surge of extraordinary power. Kakashi closed his eyes and tried to get used to the unfamiliar sensation. He knew that those eyes held tremendous power, but he had no idea how much. "Are you okay?" Sakura asked worriedly. "Yes," the teacher nodded, "everything is fine." He looked at the girl and clearly saw how the chakra, or rather what was left of it, was coursing through her body. His own strength was also running out, so, smiling sadly, he lowered the bandage over his left eye and quietly said, "I didn't even have time to get used to it." Sakura looked down and clenched her hands into fists. "If we can do this, and the world survives what happened. I hope they build statues of Naruto and Sasuke here." She muttered. "No ifs. We'll manage, it can't be any other way," the teacher encouraged her. "But what is the plan? What should we do?" "I'll tell you everything later. First, let's bury them. We need to lift the bodies onto the cliff, otherwise the river might wash them out here during the floods." Sakura nodded, stood up and helped Kakashi up. They picked up Naruto's lifeless body and headed upstairs. They did the same with Sasuke. The girl hugged them one by one for the last time and again couldn't hold back her tears. "I'm sorry, sensei. It's too painful," she justified herself. The teacher didn't answer. He decided to say goodbye too. Squatting down, he ran his hand through Naruto's light, sticking out hair. More than anything in the world, he wanted to see his student's radiant smile once more and listen to his naive speeches about the need to always go towards your goal. "Naruto, you never got to fulfill your dream. You would have been a great Hokage. But the world works differently," Kakashi said quietly. He then turned to Sasuke. "Your life has been full of struggle and disappointment. Your dream of reviving the clan will never come true either. By Itachi's will, you set out on a path that led you into darkness. I hope you have found the light now." Using the earth element, Kakashi created 2 graves, where they carefully placed the lifeless bodies. Then, after putting together the seals of a tiger, rabbit, pig, and dog, the man used the earth wall technique, and created 2 neat slabs. Sakura squatted down and used a chakra scalpel to write the names of her best friends on the graves. "Now their ninja ways are over," Kakashi concluded. "Goodbye," Sakura muttered, grimacing from the pain that had washed over her again. The wind grew stronger, driving clouds and fluttering Sakura's pink hair. She and Kakashi did not break the silence, which is why the girl thought she could hear her own heartbeat. The kunoichi sat on her knees, peering at the fresh stone slabs, but it was as if she did not see them. Before her eyes stood a terrible landscape of destruction and the bodies of her dead friends. However, the tears ended, and now in my head and heart there was only a gaping, frightening emptiness. No thoughts, no aspirations, no desires. Sakura didn't want to save the world. She didn't want to think about her comrades either. If it weren't for Sensei, she would most likely have dug a grave for herself and laid down next to her friends. All she could do now was sit like this by the gravestones and keep quiet. The war had only started 3 days ago, but to Sakura it felt like a lifetime had passed. She felt sorry for herself, which made her feel ashamed. "You fool. Should shinobi feel sorry for themselves? Pull yourself together. How pathetic you are." However, she was not only a shinobi, but also an ordinary 17-year-old girl who suddenly lost everything. They sat like that for about 40 minutes until Kakashi said, "Sakura, we need to move on. Time is against us." The kunoichi looked up at the teacher. hands in pockets, casual pose, familiar indifference in her gaze again. In her stomach, the girl felt a strange combustible mixture of feelings that were definitely inappropriate right now. Annoyance, disappointment, resentment. The girl lowered her eyes, squeezed the fabric of her tattered turtleneck and asked in a low voice. "You don't feel anything at all?" Kakashi was silent. It was not his habit to answer such questions. And Sakura understood it perfectly well. She knew the sensei too well. Cold, reasonable. The same as she remembered Sasuke. Sakura looked at the indifferent face again and said barely audibly, "Don't answer if you don't want to. I know exactly what you're going to tell me anyway." She stood up, lifting her face to the sky. She closed her eyes. The wind began to ruffle Sakura's tangled hair even more strongly. She pressed her palms to her chest, as if checking if she was alive. "Unfortunately, he is more alive than all the living." "Sakura," Kakashi said with a hint of uncertainty, "we need to catch our breath. There is no need for discord. Everything depends on our actions." "Yes, I know." The girl answered angrily, turning sharply to the teacher. "You behave worse than Sai." Kakashi's eyebrow, not hidden by the bandage, rose in surprise, but very quickly his face returned to its previous indifferent look. Haruno understood that Sensei did not deserve her anger at all. He did not have to share her grief and suddenly become emotional. Now it seemed to her that Kakashi's trembling voice after Naruto's death was just an illusion. She suddenly felt acutely how lonely she had become. "If you want to be angry with me, be angry. If it makes it easier for you to survive your grief, I don't mind," said the sensei. These words made her soul feel even colder, and Sakura no longer wanted to be angry. She pretended to ignore his remark and changed the subject. "Tell me the plan, Kakashi-sensei. What do you think we should do?" "I already told you, Sakura, we need to rest and discuss everything with a fresh mind. Now is not the best time." She pursed her lips and spent a few seconds choosing her words so as not to blurt out something unnecessary again. Then she asked, "At least tell me where we are going?" "To Konoha. But first, we'll set up camp nearby and I'll get us some food. Rest here for now, restore your chakra. You'll need to heal me." Sakura just nodded and turned away again, hearing the sensei go deeper into the forest. She slowly approached the cliff and looked down. Thoughts about Hinata suddenly crept into her head. They had never been friends, except for unhappy love. The girl smiled sadly. At least she had sought a way to Sasuke. Albeit in vain. Hinata had always lacked determination. Who knows, if she had been a little braver, she would have probably spent a few happy days with Naruto. How would she feel now? How would she tell the poor girl that the love of her life was gone? Sakura felt a painful prick in her soul. It was unclear what was harder, dispelling Tsukiyomi or telling her about such news. The girl sat on the edge of the cliff, bending her knees, and looked at the destroyed statues. Only now did she notice that only the palms of the stone Hashirama and Madara had not turned into fragments. By an amazing coincidence of fate, the hands of the greatest rivals formed the sign of reconciliation, on which the dried blood of Sasuke and Naruto remained. Her chest began to ache with frustration again. Sakura folded her hands on her knees and rested her chin on them. At that moment, a terrible and wrong thought appeared in her head. What if they just left everything as it was? Not making plans, not trying to dispel Tsukiyomi. Sakura even felt envious for a few moments. All her comrades were now seeing their ideal lives. Hinata, probably with Naruto. Ino, most likely with Sasuke. What would Sakura's dream be about? She pushed the stupid thoughts away. How stupid these thoughts were. Sighing heavily, the girl lay down on her back. The clouds were growing more and more, it looked like it was going to rain very soon. It seemed that even the world was going to mourn a little for the two great shinobi who put an end to the war. Sakura spread her arms wide and felt the thin stems of tall grass with her right palm. She lifted her fingers higher and gently ran her fingers over them with just the tips, closing her eyes. The girl tried to imagine that she was not touching plants at all, but Sasuke's hair, black as the darkest night. Goosebumps ran across her skin, and soon Sakura was overcome by fatigue and some kind of painful, tortured satisfaction. Sakura, someone's hand touched her cheek. She stood up abruptly and looked around in fear. It was dark. Was she dead? You slept all day, Kakashi said in a half-whisper, you need to eat. Horrible events burst into her memories without warning, and the girl's soul was filled with a burning emptiness again. She sighed and touched her forehead with her palm. Her head was splitting. Sakura's eyes gradually got used to the darkness. She was sitting next to an almost extinguished fire. There were no graves nearby. Where are we? Sakura asked, raising her eyebrows in surprise. I moved you here and set up a small camp. Meat was roasting over the fire. A breeze blew and the girl smelled the aroma. Her stomach immediately felt unpleasantly cramped. She hadn't even noticed how hungry she was. What time is it now? Around 10 o'clock in the evening. Kakashi approached the fire, placed the fragrant pieces on a large leaf of some tree, prepared in advance, and took something else out of his vest pocket. In the darkness, Sakura could not see what exactly it was. I came across a couple of hares and an elderberry tree in the forest. It's actually quite a toxic berry, but it's good for you in small amounts. So we have a pretty complete dinner, the teacher seemed to smile. Because of the darkness and the mask, Sakura couldn't tell for sure. Approaching the student again, the man handed her the food. Thank you, Sakura muttered and took the sheet on which lay 2 rabbit legs and a bunch of blackberries. The smell of delicious food made her insides ache even more. Without a second's delay, the girl greedily pounced on her dinner. Kakashi smiled again, closing his eyes as he always did. He approached the fire again. I also found some mint, so we'll have some tea. Sakura was no longer angry with the teacher. Now she was ashamed of having snapped at him in the morning. Having had her fill, the girl felt better. Putting aside the sheet with the seeds, she came closer to the fire. Having sat down, Sakura looked down and began to tuck a strand of hair that had fallen out behind her ear. Kakashi-sensei, I'd like to apologize for this morning. I don't know what I was thinking. The teacher interrupted her. Sakura, you have nothing to worry about. Everything is fine. Okay, the girl answered, but she felt that the feeling of guilt had not gone away. Kakashi boiled water right in the flask, then poured mint leaves into it. For a brief moment, Sakura thought that everything was fine, and they were just on a regular mission. Now they would drink tea, rest, and in the morning they would go on another stupid mission. However, reality once again gave Sakura a hearty kick in the gut. She became embarrassed, folded her hands and began nervously fiddling with her fingers. A question was spinning in her head, but the girl wasn't sure if it was appropriate to ask it. Ask, said the sensei, noticing the student's behavior. Nothing will escape his gaze. Sakura timidly raised her eyes, took a deep breath and asked as she exhaled. Kakashi-sensei, what would your eternal Tsukuyumi be? The question caught the teacher off guard. The eyebrow above his right eye rose. He looked at the student for a few seconds, then turned his gaze to the fire. Let me think, Kakashi muttered, rubbing his chin. Sakura also looked at the smoldering coals, once again thinking about her eternal sleep. The mentor, thoughtfully and somewhat drawing out his words, spoke. I probably would have been the Hokage's right hand. But not under Tsunade-sama or anyone else. But under Obito. My friend, Rin, would have been alive. You know. He fell into darkness precisely because of her death. I would have wanted them to be together. Perhaps I would have become sensei for their child. To tell the truth, Sakura hadn't expected such revelations, and she wasn't at all sure that Kakashi would answer such a personal question. She didn't even know what to say. However, the man himself continued speaking. But, I would have assumed that before Naruto and Sasuke died, Kakashi took a handkerchief out of his pocket, took the flask off the fire, put it on the ground and leaned it against a small stone next to him, letting the drink cool. Now. It's hard to say. Perhaps in my Tsukuyumi you would have been my students again in Team 7. There was silence. But not the awkward kind that happens during a boring conversation when you don't know how to continue the conversation. It was a silence that was far more eloquent than any words. Sensei touched the flask with his finger, checking if it was cool enough. Then he handed the tea to the girl. Sakura took the container and carefully took a sip of the aromatic drink. A pleasant warmth spread through her insides. She thought about how even in the ideal version of reality, her teacher thought about his friends. "A bit selfish, isn't it?" he asked, smiling again and breaking the silence. "Not at all," Sakura said quietly. "On the contrary." Her dreams now seemed like complete nonsense. Although Kakashi didn't ask the student a question in return, she still spoke in a low voice. "Before all these events, I would have said that in my Tsukuyomi, I would have been equal in strength to Sasuke and Naruto. I would have finally caught up with them. Walking hand in hand next to them. Don't get me wrong, I don't consider myself weak. But, to tell the truth, I was always 10 steps behind. And also..." Sakura felt the blood rush to her cheeks. "Sasuke would finally be with me." Kakashi stared at the girl without looking away. She glanced at him briefly and noticed that the indifference had once again left her teacher's face. The kunoichi felt a new wave of pain trying to break into her heart. Holding back the lump in her throat, she continued. "Well, now. All I want is to see them alive." The girl bit her lower lip to drown out the mental pain with physical pain. But it was useless. The hand holding the flask of tea began to tremble. Kakashi noticed this, carefully took the container, and touched the student's shoulder with his other hand. "Sakura. You asked me this morning if I felt anything? Of course I do. But first and foremost, I need to remain a shinobi. And see this through to the end, making every effort to keep you alive." After these words, guilt was added to the unbearable pain. There was no longer any strength to hold back tears. Sakura pulled her knees up, clasped her head in her hands and whined like a cornered animal. The mentor sat closer and hugged the girl as tightly as he had in the morning. "The pain goes away, Sakura," Kakashi said quietly. "You will never forget it. It will live with you until the end of your days, but in the end it will become easier. Salvation will be found in the people close to you." The girl had no answer. She had no one closer than them. Therefore, if you think about it like that, she was not destined to get rid of her grief. Therefore, having calmed down a little, she freed herself from the teacher's embrace and asked the question that had arisen in her head that morning. What if Madara and Obito were right? What if we don't need to dispel the eternal Tsukuyomi? Sakura asked the very question that had been on Kakashi's mind. Even before he had buried Sasuke and Naruto with his own hands. The entire world he had lived in was made of nothing but pain and hatred. Common sense screamed at how wrong her student's assumption about the correctness of Madara and Obito's worldview had been. Well, and the heart. The heart wanted peace. Not only for itself. He wanted to agree with Sakura, abandon his comrades and end his life like this, wandering the world, sitting by the fire, gradually coming to terms with the pain. For a few moments, the man even thought that they could eventually become more than just teacher and student for each other. But this was too much. Kakashi shook his head slightly, clearing away the bad thoughts, and looked into the distance, pondering his answer. He pulled the mask off his face, revealing himself to a stranger for the first time in years, and took a sip of mint tea from his flask. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the girl's eyebrows rise in surprise, but she quickly looked away. Now he had nothing to hide. And he didn't really want to. But in reality, Sakura was wrong to assume that Kakashi didn't feel anything. And even though her teacher was a master at hiding his emotions, deep down he wanted the girl to read it on his face. The sensei was in unbearable pain. But he was a shinobi. And until his last breath, whenever it came, he would remain one. Kakashi took another sip of tea, pulled his mask back up, handed the flask to Sakura, and held his palms out to the fire. "We have no moral right to leave the world immersed in the eternal Tsukuyomi," he said quietly. "Why not? Don't our friends deserve to be happy after everything they've been through?" Sakura responded hotly. Kakashi frowned and answered decisively. "They deserved it. And everyone deserves to make a choice. Neither Madara nor Obito had the right to make a decision for the others. And you and I even less so." The man turned his gaze to the girl. She looked closely at his face. "She's probably trying to see my emotions again," he thought. "It's too late now. Why did she turn away when I took off the stupid mask?" And then Sakura pulled her knees up, lowered her face and muttered. "I know you're right. And I think so too. But there are no buts here, the sensei interrupted the student. There is a duty that must be fulfilled. Sakura smiled sadly. But I still don't know what debt exactly you're talking about. She paused for a few moments. You think I'm weak, right? That's why you don't talk about the plan. Kakashi's heart sank. He bit his lip against the guilt that washed over him. Such thoughts had never even crossed his mind. All he really wanted was to keep Sakura from making the inevitable choice for as long as possible. Today, when he was getting them dinner, all he could think about was the plan. And no matter how he looked at it, the idea was disgusting and unacceptable. Kakashi didn't fully understand how it worked, but he knew for sure there would be a price to pay. So he justified himself. Sakura, it's not like that at all. I don't really understand how to implement what I planned, and I don't like throwing words to the wind. The girl smiled bitterly. Well, yes. You don't know anything, but you are firmly convinced that we need to go to Konoha. He chuckled. So that's how she saw him. Someone who thought he was above everyone else. Kakashi had wanted to escape that image so much, had tried so hard to live differently, and in the end, it was all in vain. He was sitting face to face with the only person close to him, but Sakura didn't seem to consider him close. It wasn't enough to rip the mask off his face. He had to rip the covers off his thoughts as well. Kakashi took a deep breath and said, "We need to find a scroll with one of the second Hokage's forbidden techniques that you know of." He hesitated and began to rub his forehead, as if he was stalling for time and choosing his words. I never thought that I would seriously discuss its use. But hard times require hard decisions. This is most likely our only chance. Sakura turned to the sensei. She frowned for a few seconds, then widened her eyes and pressed her hand to her lips. The man realized the student had guessed. She was always smart. You really want to use unholy resurrection, she muttered in horror. Kakashi looked down and sighed heavily. What options do we have? I won't be able to subdue the tailed beasts. Even Madara had a hard time dealing with them, and I certainly don't have that kind of chakra reserves. But Sasuke locked them in stone prisons with just one look. Sakura objected. Sasuke could do it because he got the Rinnegan from Hagoromo. My eye doesn't obey me very well either. Sakura carefully, as if choosing her words, clarified. And, you're going to resurrect both of them? Unfortunately, no. If I understand correctly, we will have to, Kakashi faltered and, coughing, continued, pay the price. In exchange for the resurrection, we will have to make a sacrifice. Sakura continued her cautious assumptions. Since we already have the Rinnegan, and only Naruto had the tailed beast chakra. Yes, Kakashi nodded, we'll have to resurrect him. Before burying the boys, I pulled out a few hairs from the guy and saved them. Just in case. Sensei slapped his breast pocket to prove his words. The girl smiled sadly. So you planned this from the very beginning? Kakashi didn't look at his student, feeling a slight pang of conscience. I planned to fulfill my duty. But I didn't fully understand how. And who are you going to sacrifice? The girl continued to ask cautiously. No one yet. I haven't thought about it yet. First, I need to find a scroll with the technique, and then study it. The girl pursed her lips and turned away. Kakashi guessed what she was thinking and quietly muttered. Sakura, I will never let you die. But the student said nothing in response. The silence was heavy again. Kakashi really wanted to talk about something else, to break the sticky, unpleasant silence. But the girl did it herself. It's late. Let's go to sleep. Tomorrow I'll treat you, and we'll go to the hidden leaf. Lightning flashed somewhere in the distance, and a few seconds later a loud rumble of thunder was heard. The wind began to pick up and sway the treetops. Several leaves fell off and landed on the ground. Goosebumps ran across Kakashi's skin, it was getting colder. Autumn was finally coming into its own. I'll build us some tents out of earth. It looks like it's going to rain soon. Then he stood up, walked a few meters away and folded the necessary seals twice. 2 miniature dugouts grew next to the fire. Then the man headed to the nearest tree. In addition to food, he prepared some grass and leaves to build something resembling a bed. Sakura stood up, took some of the plants from the teacher and quietly thanked him. Thank you for taking care of me. I really am no good for anything, I didn't even think about a place to stay for the night. And, swallowing her tears, the girl turned away and dove into the improvised hut. Kakashi did not think that Sakura was good for anything, but again he could not find the right words. Therefore, eaten up with guilt, he hung his head and wandered into his hut. He sat down at the entrance, pulled off his mask, pulled his knees up, and touched the bandage covering his Rinnegan with his palm. His fingers began to squeeze the fabric on their own, and Kakashi closed his eyes. Damn. Damn. Damn, he cursed through his teeth so that Sakura wouldn't hear anything. The thunder rumbled again. The man raised his head and put his palm out into the street. The wind immediately hit it with a strong gust of air. It smelled of dampness and wet earth. And then several large drops fell on the teacher's palm, and at the same moment a heavy rain broke out. Well, even nature couldn't calmly come to terms with what happened. Kakashi touched his cheek with his wet palm. It made his body crawl. Despite the fact that he was incredibly tired, he didn't feel like sleeping at all. And he didn't really need to rest. There was no one else to fight anyway. He sighed heavily and dropped his head onto the grass that had been laid out as a bed. Just a day ago, he saw his best friend die for the second time. Obito. Who would have thought that this cheerful boy would turn into a monster for the sake of love? For love. The man's heart skipped a beat at the phrase. Now, when the world hung over the abyss of hell, he suddenly felt sad that he had never allowed himself to love. Kakashi knew that many women liked him, but he never let them into his heart. Because I was a coward. I lied to myself that I didn't want anything like that. But in reality I was always afraid of pain. Kakashi cursed again. Realizing that he definitely wouldn't be able to fall asleep, he jerked up and went out into the rain. Giant drops began to hit the silver-headed crown with all their might. But he even liked it. He inhaled a deep lungful of fresh air and turned his face to the sky. And suddenly, behind the deafening noise of the rain, the man heard an unnatural howl. At first, he tensed up and stood at attention, expecting an attack. However, the next moment he realized, this was not a howl at all, but bitter hysteria. Kakashi walked quickly to Sakura's place to sleep. He exhaled convulsively, trying to think of the right words, and squatted down at the entrance. The rain was so heavy that the water from his hair ran down his collar and onto his palms. But he didn't pay attention. The girl quieted down, obviously noticing him. Because of the darkness and the downpour, nothing could be seen properly until suddenly the dugout was momentarily illuminated by a bright bluish light of lightning. Sakura was kneeling in the corner, her palms and forehead resting on the dirty wall. The man lowered the cloth and spoke. "If you want to be alone, I understand." In response, only a timid sob was heard. I can't stay away while you're in this state." And again, an eloquent, bitter silence. Kakashi clenched and unclenched his fists, hesitating to enter. It was ironic that his eye could once copy the most complex technique, but not a single Sharingan could learn the ability to support his loved ones in a human way. However, now, everything was completely different from usual. The walls, even the strongest ones, were about to collapse. He stood up and, bending down, entered the dugout. Kakashi walked slowly towards Sakura and sat down on the ground next to her, leaning his back against the wall. He placed his hand on his student's shoulder and exhaled loudly. For a brief moment, the dwelling was illuminated by lightning again, and the clap of thunder was heard again. The words were stuck in his throat again. So the man only squeezed his fingers on Sakura's shoulder a little tighter. And suddenly the girl threw herself into his arms, burying her nose in his chest. Without thinking, the teacher hugged the girl tightly to himself and felt his palms tremble treacherously, and a lump rose in his throat. He rested his forehead on the top of the girl's head and bit his lip. "I'm all wet because of the rain." "Be careful," he began to say, but then stopped. Did it matter? Words were unnecessary. The embrace was what kept them afloat. Simple closeness, the warmth of a familiar person, the need to feel each other's pain. "Kakashi-sensei," Sakura said, sobbing, "stay here." The man was taken aback by this proposal, but did not have time to object. His student continued. "Don't think anything like that. It's just..." I'll go crazy if I'm alone with my thoughts today. Kakashi didn't answer. He reached out with his wet palm to Sakura's pink-haired crown and began to stroke it, as if lulling her. And then he muttered, "Get some sleep. I'll be there." They sat like that for another 20 minutes, until fatigue finally took its toll. And without noticing it, Kakashi and Sakura fell into a restless sleep. Until, a few hours later, a deafening, inhuman roar was heard. Chapter 4. Eternity with a friend She didn't even notice how she sank into a strange, restless half-sleep. Apparently, the teacher's embrace finally lulled her to sleep. Sakura would have slept until the morning, if not for the strange, otherworldly cry. The soul sank into the heels from the sudden awakening. The girl grabbed the air with her lips and mechanically touched her chest, as if trying to calm the crazy heartbeat. She quickly glanced towards the street. The sky was gray. So, they still managed to sleep more or less normally. Kakashi reacted instantly. He jumped up, lifted the bandage from his eye and, before leaving, said, "Sakura, stay here. I'll check what's there." "No way," the kunoichi said crisply and also rose to her feet. The teacher had already gone outside and was looking around in bewilderment. Sakura quickly followed him and climbed out of the dugout. Cold air with the smell of rain hit her nose. The sky was still covered with leaden clouds. Judging by the drops dripping from the leaves, the storm had ended only recently. Her feet sank into the sticky mud under the weight of her body. Sakura listened with all her might, but there was a heavy silence all around, which seemed like it could be cut with a knife. "What was that?" she asked quietly, as if someone could hear them. "I have no idea," Kakashi answered in a subdued voice. Sensei moved towards the forest, trying not to make any unnecessary sounds. And suddenly the vile, rolling squeal was repeated. It sounded like the howl of some animal, only too loud and unnatural. Sakura felt like her heart had stopped. She froze where she stood, as if she had grown into the ground. The teacher cast a quick glance at his student and said, "I think I know whose voice it is." "Voice?" Goosebumps ran down the back of Sakura's neck. The sounds were more like a distorted animal roar. The girl approached the sensei. He formed a seal with his fingers, concerting chakra, closed his eyes and quickly said, "I need time to use the Rinnegan. Although it requires much less chakra than the Sharingan, it is quite difficult to control." Sakura nodded. Her hand automatically reached for the place where the pouch with kunai usually was. But, naturally, after the war, neither the weapon nor the pouch remained. The girl cursed and began to concentrate chakra in her fists, preparing to attack something unknown. And again the screech. Only this time Sakura was ready to swear that in these inhuman, terrible sounds she heard laughter. The girl's body trembled. She was not afraid. She had been through the war, seen horrors and thousands of deaths, buried her best friends, but this sound. It was creepy to hear it, considering that besides her and Kakashi, not a single living soul should exist at this moment. The man opened his eyes and removed the seal. He frowned and peered into the distance. "I see chakra. A lot of inhuman energy. There is no doubt, it is one of the tailed beasts." The teacher spoke seriously and quickly. "Far?" "No. About a kilometer." "I'll check," Sakura said and was already getting ready to jump. But the teacher put his right hand in front of her and shook his head. "I myself." Before the girl could object, he concentrated chakra in his legs, pushed off and jumped onto the tree, reaching the very top in a few seconds. And that was enough for the beast to notice them. "We're in trouble," he screamed furiously. "I knew the last sleepless people were somewhere around here. What fun we're going to have now." Kakashi jumped down and quickly said, "This is Shikaku." Apparently, he got bored being free. The sound of running paws echoed through the forest. "How are we going to defeat him?" Sakura exclaimed in fear. Before Kakashi could answer, they heard the sound of trees breaking and another beast running to their left. They both looked up at the same time and saw long red tails flying over the treetops. Sakura's eyebrows rose. She and Kakashi exchanged glances and, without saying a word, jumped up a tree to look at what was happening. The teacher frowned and peered intently into the horizon. "Kurama!" One-tailed screeched disgustingly. "What do you want here?" The tailed beast stopped about 300 meters from Sakura and Kakashi's overnight stay. Both Kurama and Shikaku took stances that allowed them to attack at any moment. Even from such a distance, it was noticeable how the nine-tails fur stood on end. It began to slowly wag its tails, and the air currents reached Kakashi and Sakura, trying to throw them off the branch. "Maybe we should get out while they sort this out," the girl whispered. The teacher also answered in a whisper. "You're probably right. But it seems Kurama is on our side. Let's wait a bit. If a battle breaks out, we'll run away." The fox's loud, bass voice rang out. "What do you want here? Have you decided to have some fun?" Shikaku said something incoherent and hesitated for a second, enough time for Kurama to leap and swing his paw at the one-tailed. "Stop it," he yelled. "You wanted to kill those people?" growled the nine-tailed fox. "Answer me." "Stop talking to me like that," the sand demon continued to screech. "As if you were stronger than me." The fox chuckled maliciously and asked ingratiatingly. "Do you want to check this?" The raccoon began to squirm as if it were a snake in a frying pan, trying not to meet his rival's gaze. Then he raised his nose and said, "I don't want to. But only because I don't care about you. Go where you were going." Kurama grinned again and said triumphantly, "That's good. If you try to get close to the Valley of the End, you'll get it in the neck." One-tailed snorted contemptuously and reluctantly turned back. "Next time I'll give you hell," he squeaked at the end. "If you want to fight, fight, Shikaku. And leave empty threats for someone else." The sand demon didn't answer, but proudly raised his tail and with a jumping gait moved somewhere into the distance. Kurama turned to Sakura and Kakashi and covered the distance between them in several long jumps. The grin disappeared from his face, and his red eyes turned into slits. Finally, he stopped and began to carefully examine the man and the girl. "Thank you for helping us, Kurama." Kakashi bowed slightly and then looked up at the fox. But he apparently didn't appreciate the gratitude. "You should hide your almighty eye. After that sucker Sasuke and that bastard Madara, this purple ripple is annoying." "And where is Naruto?" the nine-tails asked menacingly. The man nodded and hid the Rinnegan behind his headband. Sakura looked down and answered the question in a muffled voice. "He's gone. You must have felt it." "The boy was killed by Uchiha?" The nine-tails' eyes narrowed even more and he bared his teeth. "You could say that," Kakashi replied. "It looks like they dealt fatal blows to each other at the same time." Kurama growled and whispered through his teeth. "Damn these Uchiha. They always cause nothing but trouble." "There will be no more troubles," the sensei snapped. "Sasuke was the last of his clan. There is no one left to revive him. I can't say that I'm upset by this fact." "Well, and Naruto?" Nine-tails dropped to the ground, and the grin disappeared from the fox's face. He suddenly looked up at the sky and muttered in a deep voice. "I stopped feeling the boy's chakra yesterday. But I didn't want to think about his death. Well, miracles don't happen. Too bad, he was a good person." Sakura's heart ached with sadness. The sight of the menacing demon grieving for his Jinchuriki hurt her already crippled soul. Who would have thought that the sunny boy would be able to bind to himself even the embodiment of hatred that once destroyed Konoha? Although, there was nothing surprising about it. For him, everything was a piece of cake. And to gain respect from those who despised him, and to defeat pain, and to end the war. Only surviving turned out to be an impossible task. Sakura clenched her hand into a fist and pressed it to her chest. "We have a plan. If you want, we can help you," the girl said, bowing her head. Kurama snorted. "I don't give a damn about your help. You only see me here because you were nearby and heard Shikaku. And Naruto loved you both. That's all." Kakashi hastened to add. "Sakura isn't just offering help. I'm going to use Edo Tensei to resurrect Naruto to dispel Tsukuyomi. Then I can seal you." The fox looked closely at the man's face for a few seconds. So I can't be reborn anymore?" "You can't," the teacher nodded. The demon continued. And this means that the next smart guy won't be able to put me in the Ten Tails, and, therefore, no new resurrection of Kaguya and the eternal Tsukiyomi. That's right. Kurama chuckled. Well, I'll think about your offer. He inclined his muzzle to Kakashi and smiled faintly. I'll allow you to summon me when you resurrect Naruto. I'll ask him if he wants to spend eternity with his friend. Thanks again, Sakura muttered. And the demon turned around and slowly rushed into the distance without saying goodbye. A relieved sigh escaped the girl's chest. He left, she stated the already obvious fact. For a few minutes they peered at the horizon, from which the first rays of sunlight began to break through. The clouds gradually dispersed, and the sky began to explode with pinkish-purple hues. The teacher and student jumped to the ground. Only now did Sakura notice that she was shaking all over. Autumn had come, and she was still wearing post-war rags. It was time to visit her home. At least to get kunai with shurikens and normal clothes. And the thought of Konoha made the girl feel sick. After all, somewhere there in the village, her parents were hanging on the branches of the divine tree. There has been peace in eternal Tsukiyomi for 3 days now, she muttered, and we still haven't done anything. Kakashi put his hand on her shoulder and said cheerfully. I promise that we will free everyone the day after tomorrow. A Rinnegan user does not need time to master the technique. Therefore, it will be enough for me to just read the scroll. And then it's a small matter. Scroll. Because of the encounter with the tailed beasts, Sakura stopped thinking about the sacrifice needed for resurrection, although all her thoughts before going to bed were about it. When she gave in to her emotions and cried yesterday, it would be unfair to say that it was only because of Naruto and Sasuke. Yes, a new wave of pain washed over her, but at the same time, the girl felt childishly annoyed for herself. After all, she made a choice. Even though she didn't have the courage to say it out loud yet. As the teacher rightly noted, they had no moral right to decide for others. True and fair words. That's why Sakura had no intention of sacrificing innocent people. Commentary on Chapter 4. Eternity with a friend. I would be glad to hear your opinions. Chapter 5. Lifeless house The last rays of the setting sun illuminated the Hokage rock and the numerous roofs of the houses, next to which towered massive, leafless, ornate branches with eerie cocoons hanging from them. The only two awake shinobi looked at each other and entered the main gates of Konoha. The lanterns on the poles were usually lit by this time, but now there was no light. Apparently, something had happened to the power line during the 3 days of eternal Tsukiyomi, because there was no one to monitor it. Sakura paused for a moment and pursed her lips. Kakashi couldn't tell what she was thinking, but he guessed that their thoughts were similar. Konoha looked like it hadn't been inhabited for years. The only thing missing was the tumbleweeds that passed by their feet. The village hadn't been rebuilt since Pain's attack, and that fact, along with the terrifying divine tree, left a heavy impression that was indelible. A painful, aching feeling of hopelessness appeared in the man's chest. He had no illusions about how he would see the hidden leaf. But reality literally knocked the ground out from under his feet. Kakashi had not felt anything like this even during the attack of the Ninetales and Pain. Then, comrades were dying around him, but hundreds of other brave shinobi were fighting and not losing heart. His enemy was always facing him. He was used to looking at his opponent. Crush him with techniques and cunning. Hate. Despise. Who should I despise now? The vile twisted branches? Madara? Kaguya? The latter were already dead, and the tree. It is only a consequence of catastrophic events. An obvious thought flashed through Kakashi's mind. The embodiment of evil was no longer a person or even a living being. The enemy was now infinity itself. And even though he knew how to act, that didn't stop the hero of 2 great wars from feeling like an insignificant bug in front of an invincible force. They quickened their pace a little, and Sakura pulled ahead. She looked around with inconsolable sadness in her eyes. Her small fist was pressed to her chest, and the sight of his sad student made Kakashi's heart ache. He was tired of seeing her in pain. He really wanted to comfort Sakura, but he knew that only time could overcome grief. And so the only salvation was to quickly put his crazy plan into action. And choose the lucky one who will become the victim. The silence was broken only by the sound of 2 pairs of feet stepping through puddles that had not yet dried. Blown by the cold evening wind, they slowly moved towards the Hokage residence. The sunset was behind them, and the last scarlet rays slowly disappeared from the stone faces of the village leaders, plunging the world into twilight blue. Suddenly the girl stopped and called out. "Kakashi-sensei, do you hear that?" The man stopped and strained his ears. A muffled whine could be heard somewhere nearby. "This is probably someone's dog. 3 days without owners," he muttered. "We must help him," the student exclaimed. "Poor animal, so long without food and water." "Sakura, not now. Think about it, how many of these are there in Konoha? And in other villages? Nothing will happen to them during this time, and if we start helping everyone, we will only waste precious hours. It will be much more effective to quickly rescue their masters from Tsukiyomi's clutches." The girl sighed heavily and muttered. "You are right. As always, you do not lose your cool." She definitely thought I was a cynical person again. Kakashi thought. So be it. Better to be a scoundrel who fulfilled his duty than a kind-hearted fool who wasted precious minutes on nonsense. What are the lives of some dogs compared to human ones? But this decision upset the only person close to him. Dogs. This thought burned like lightning in the man's insides. He quickly bit his thumb, smeared the blood on his palm and, having folded the seals of the tiger, snake, dragon, and dog, exclaimed. "Summoning technique." And then he crouched down, touching the ground with his hand. An ornate seal instantly spread along the road, and 8 summoned ninken emerged from thick clouds of smoke. Sakura raised her eyebrows in confusion and asked. "Have you decided to increase the number of Konoha dogs a little more?" "We're not your little dogs," the smallest dog barked. "Pakken," Kakashi addressed him, ignoring his student's question, "I have an unusual request for you." But the ninken didn't listen to him. The pugs, always indifferent eyes, were now looking around with surprise. "What the hell happened here?" the pug muttered. Kakashi sighed heavily. "It's a long story. And I don't have time to tell it. Now your task will be to find all the domestic animals locked in the houses. And provide them with water and food." "What?" The dog was indignant. "Where are their owners?" "That's exactly what we're doing." Ninken frowned. "You still remember that our abilities are focused on surveillance and combat, right?" "There's no one to fight," the man smiled bitterly. "Help your brothers. That's all." "Okay," muttered Akino, a ninken with a funny black pince-nez on his nose, "let's get to work." And the flock, dispersing through the streets, set out to carry out the task. "I told you," Sakura said quietly. "Always a cool head." "Thank you." The girl came closer and timidly hugged the teacher. This hug was not like the sorrow-filled closeness that had been between them for the last 24 hours. But Kakashi quickly brushed off the strange thought and simply pressed Sakura to his chest. "Let's go," the man muttered, "it will soon be completely dark. We need to get to the Hokage Tower." He turned around for a moment, hearing the sound of breaking glass. One of the dogs had already reached its destination. The shinobi quickly headed towards the residence. Kakashi wasn't sure that the scroll with the secrets of the impure world reincarnation was kept in the same place as the other forbidden techniques. But he really counted on it. After all, if his fears were justified, the task would be much more difficult. Surely, there were records of Edo Tensei in one of Orochimaru's hideouts, but it would take many days to find it. And during this time, it was quite possible that the personalities of those who ended up in Tsukuyomi would be destroyed. And there would simply be no one to save the world for. Kakashi shook his head slightly, driving away bad thoughts. Everything will work out. It couldn't be any other way. When there were only a few dozen meters left to the gates of the Hokage's residence, Sakura stopped and said. "Kakashi-sensei, can I leave you for a while? It's not far from home." "My clothes," the girl hesitated for a moment, as if embarrassed by her request, "are not warm at all. I'm of little use now. I'll stock up on weapons, change my clothes and find you here. Besides, I'm completely useless in searching." "Of course, go ahead," the man nodded, "we'll meet here in half an hour." "Yes." Sakura answered cheerfully, turned around and, concentrating her chakra in her legs, quickly walked away in the direction of her home. Kakashi watched her go for a few seconds. He wasn't fooled by her false optimism. They had spent a whole day getting to Konoha and had barely spoken. After Sakura had learned of their plan, something had changed in her. She had withdrawn into herself even more, though it seemed like she couldn't do much more, and was lost in thought. And the man seemed to guess what she was worried about. But he brushed aside the guesses again. He quickly walked towards the treasured room, where even Jounins were forbidden to enter. Kakashi quickly crossed the protective barrier, opened the door and found himself in a small dark office lined with shelves of scrolls. Inside, it smelled of dampness and old paper. A weak twilight light was still coming through a small window. With a heavy sigh, the man entered. Suddenly, Pakin appeared out of the smoke nearby. Kakashi, it's done. It was a bit difficult to get into the houses, but we managed. I created clones, so it was done quickly. A few cats tried to attack, but we, managed. Thank you, the man smiled and, squatting down, stroked the pug on the scruff of the neck. Do you need any more help? The dog asked in a deep voice. It looks like things are going really badly for you. I don't think you can help here, Kakashi chuckled sadly. Okay, the pug nodded slightly, good luck. And with a loud bang the Ninken disappeared. It turned out that the bulk of the shelves were occupied by archival documents, and all the forbidden techniques fit in one small section, so in just 10 minutes Kakashi found the coveted scroll. The man breathed a sigh of relief and went outside, where Sakura was already waiting for him in her usual mission uniform, a white cloak with a hood, a red vest, a pink skirt and black shorts. Did you find it? The girl asked with the same feigned cheerfulness. Yes, Kakashi nodded, but I haven't opened it yet. We have all of Konoha at our disposal now, we need to sit down somewhere and study the technique. And, of course, have a snack. But you yourself said that the Rinnegan doesn't require time, Sakura objected. True. But this is the first time I'll be using it for real. Besides, we need to rest a bit. We've been moving all day. I don't understand you, the student smiled sadly, sometimes we're in a hurry. Sometimes we're not. There was no time for pets, but is there time to rest? The pang of conscience was not long in coming. We are in a hurry, but the world can only rely on us. Therefore, it is vital to keep yourself in shape. Okay, Sakura folded her arms across her chest, sighing heavily, I'll trust you. However, there was distrust in the girl's voice. Or something much worse? Contempt? Kakashi's heart was once again burned by the nasty feeling he had felt yesterday. You don't feel anything at all? Sakura asked in his memories. At all? In the west, the sky was still dark and purple-blue. But above the shinobi's heads, the stars were already shining brightly on the black canvas. In the northeast, the full moon was shining, but its dim light was not enough to discern the emotions on the student's face. That's why Kakashi didn't even try, he looked down and, losing his patience, said coldly. Sakura, that's enough. What, enough? She asked, puzzled. Consider me a bastard, the sensei snapped. A heavy silence fell. The wind blew through Sakura's pink hair and the hem of her cloak, breaking the silence with the rustle of canvas. What makes you think I think so? The girl muttered. I'm not a fool. I know. But instead of answering, Sakura changed the subject and made a suggestion that left the teacher taken aback. Let's go to Shusha. Tsunade-sama always went there, so I know for sure, they have sake. Kakashi's eyebrows rose. Have you decided to get drunk? We won't be using the technique today, right? We need to wait until the morning. So why not brighten up the last evening? Kakashi narrowed his eyes in disbelief. The last evening? But the student didn't answer. She overtook him and walked resolutely up the lifeless street toward the bar. Kakashi's guesses were apparently not unfounded. It was as if he had been doused with cold water. Do you really think I'm going to sacrifice you? The man exclaimed angrily. Do you think I'm capable of that? Sakura stopped abruptly, her shoulders tensing and her hands clenching into fists in the moonlight. No. You'll try to dissuade me. But I've already decided everything, her voice trembled, so I ask you to drink sake with me, I've never tried it. But I want to at the end. Kakashi clenched his teeth and felt a hot wave of a burning mixture of anger, disappointment and resentment creep through his body. Commentary on Chapter 5. Lifeless House. Thanks to everyone who reads, comments and clicks waiting for the next one. I am infinitely grateful for the interest in my work. Chapter 6. Executioners and victims Sakura didn't understand where such blind determination came from. As they moved towards Konoha, a detailed plan was born on its own. There was no need to change into warmer clothes. After all, what was the point of worrying about the cold October nights when there was less than a day left to live? But it was a great excuse to be home before the inevitable. All the girl wanted was to say goodbye. Sakura reveled in the thought that she was luckier than Naruto and Sasuke. After all, she had a small head start. Unlike her friends, she knew when death would knock on her door. Farewell letters are a banal but effective way to say the last word. Of course, I would like to hug everyone at the end. But thanks for that. The girl learned every phrase she was going to write by heart on the way to her native village. Important words for all dear people. For mom and dad. So that they don't grieve too much, but are proud. After all, their daughter is going to die as a hero. For Ino. So that she doesn't relax and never forgets their rivalry. And also finds her happiness. To Fifth Sama, with the deepest gratitude. So that the Hokage knows how precious their bond was to Sakura. She wanted to write at least a few words for Hinata and Sai. But time was running out. So with a shaking hand, the girl sealed 3 envelopes and left them near the front door of the empty, cold home. It cost her a lot to restrain herself and not stain the letters with tears. But if she learned anything from Kakashi, it was to be a real shinobi. And real shinobi do not know fear and pain. She didn't want to stay in her parents' house any longer than necessary. The gloomy view outside the window made the girl's heart clench with melancholy. But this depressing landscape motivated her. After all, the sooner they finished everything, the sooner Konoha would return to life. She closed her eyes, remembering her parents' faces, and ran to the meeting place with the sensei. Under no circumstances should she remember her mom and dad dangling in capsules on a nasty branch. They were alive. They were healthy. She was just not destined to see it. Sakura, stop. Thinking of me as a bastard. The teacher's piercing words knocked her off balance. The girl dug her nails into her palms with all her might, trying to drown out the wave of tears with physical pain. And Sakura had only offered to drink sake. Why did the sensei's words hurt so much? Because it was her own fault. Her behavior had led to a logical outcome. And, even though Sakura didn't want to admit it, it was annoying. She signed her own death warrant. Can't she be a little more tolerant? But it didn't matter anymore. She wanted to say goodbye to the teacher too. But in order to make it less bitter, after all, writing letters is easier than looking into someone's eyes, she had the brilliant idea of diluting the last evening with a little intoxication. Sakura took a few deep breaths and headed towards the bar again. She didn't want to sort things out. Really? The inner voice asked sarcastically. Little liar. You can deceive yourself, but you can't fool Kakashi. You're afraid of death. And behind the mask of pride you hide sadness. Shut up, the girl muttered quietly so that the teacher wouldn't hear. She pulled her hood up, as if to shield herself from the world. No, no tears. Not now. Suddenly, breaking the heavy silence, the teacher jumped up to her, tugged her sleeve and turned her sharply towards himself. He stared into the girl's eyes for a few seconds, which widened in surprise. The teacher's gaze made her feel cold inside. The black eye, not hidden behind the bandage, looked at her as if she were her worst enemy. As if Sakura was to blame for the eternal Tsukuyomi. As if the sensei was about to pierce her with Chidori. Are you out of your mind? The sensei roared, shaking the student hard by the shoulders. Sakura looked at the man stupidly, not even knowing how to answer. Sweat appeared on her palms. Kakashi cursed, let go of her and turned away. A strange feeling mixed with the cold in the girl's stomach. Conscience? Guilt? Regret? You. I won't allow it, the teacher's voice faltered. Kakashi's breathing became ragged and uneven. It was as if he had run a couple of kilometers without resting. The man suddenly grabbed his chest and leaned forward. What's wrong with you? Sakura cried out in fear, rushing towards the teacher. The momentary confusion quickly gave way to a trained medic's instincts. She grabbed his elbow, concentrated chakra in her palm, ready to begin the healing, and peered into the man's face. And then Sakura's heart sank into her heels, and a convulsive sigh escaped her lungs. Kakashi jerked his hand sharply and freed himself from his student's embrace. The green glow disappeared from the girl's fingers. She couldn't believe what she saw, but she was ready to swear she hadn't imagined it. In the dim moonlight, it was clearly visible. A tear rolled down from a closed eye onto the black mask. The kunoichi's eyebrows went up. She covered her lips with her palms and felt that there was no trace left of her spirit. She wanted to be brave so much. The universe knows she really wanted to. But when the most powerful and unshakable person shows weakness, it becomes truly scary. Sakura didn't know what to say. And that made it even worse. Kakashi had always been there. He had supported her every time. And now, when it was time to reciprocate, she couldn't utter a word. She couldn't even move. After just a few moments, the man straightened up and muttered. Sorry. I gave in to a moment of weakness. Another couple of heavy, silent seconds. Let's go, said the teacher. Turning towards the road, let's drink some sake. It was only a 5-minute walk from the Hokage residence to Shushue. But to Sakura, it seemed like an eternity. She walked behind her sensei, occasionally looking up at his back. And every time, she felt a sharp pain in her heart. What had happened? Why did her teacher's emotion affect her so much? But it would be great if it all ended with just that damned hair. An invisible gap formed between them, which could be felt on the skin. What are you doing, Sakura? The inner voice woke up again. You just buried your loved ones. You are left alone in the whole world. Why the conflicts? But the kunoichi had no idea how to fix the situation. And she also didn't understand why her plan now looked like such a pathetic solution. Why did she suddenly feel ashamed of it? The bar, like all the other shops and establishments on what was once the noisiest street in Konoha, looked depressing. At this time of day, life was just beginning to boil here. And now, nothing but darkness and cold emptiness. The door, of course, was unlocked. Kakashi pushed it lightly. Immediately, several cats jumped out of the open window. They probably had something to eat in the absence of people. The teacher went inside without even turning around to look at the student. Kakashi-sensei, I brought some candles from home, Sakura muttered. But he didn't seem to hear her. And so the girl silently followed, took a small candle from the inside pocket of her coat, lit it and went to the bar. A faint, heady aroma hung in the air, reminding us that life had been in full swing here just a couple of days ago. There were glasses and empty plates on the tables. There must have been scraps on them, but the stray cats had gotten rid of them. Kakashi walked behind the bar in a friendly manner and began to look at the bottles. Do you prefer light or aged? He asked coldly, slamming 2 large containers onto the bar. I don't care, the student answered almost in a whisper. Then let's start with something easy. The man took 2 small cups from the shelf and poured the drink into them. Sakura bit her lip. Again this boring silence. Drink. You wanted it, didn't you? Kakashi said in an icy voice, moving the cup closer to his student. He sat down opposite her at the bar, lowered his mask and drained his drink in one gulp. This time Sakura didn't look away. She peered desperately, trying to find at least a drop of something on the man's face other than indifference. But all she saw was a swaying shadow from the candle flame and the usual coldness. There was no trace left of the nervous breakdown. The girl grabbed the cup, drinking the sake in one gulp. And immediately regretted it. The drink burned her esophagus, and her nose stung. Sakura grimaced. The first time you need to take smaller sips, Kakashi said. The girl's fists clenched against her will. She asked. Pour me some more, sensei. The man didn't even bat an eyelid and filled the cups again. They emptied their cups at the same time. This time it was easier to drink. Sakura hadn't had a chance to eat all day, so she felt the warmth from her stomach quickly spreading throughout her body. The kunoichi suddenly felt the courage that had disappeared after the skirmish at the Hokage's residence. It was impossible to postpone the conversation, so she took a deep breath and spoke. Kakashi-sensei, we need to discuss this. Right now. There will be no other time. The man asked mockingly. And what will this conversation be about? About your death? Does this make you laugh? Sakura asked in a muffled voice. Do you see that I'm having fun? The teacher answered with a question. The girl hesitated again, looking down. She began to twist the cup in her hands, not knowing what to say next. The silence was broken by an icy voice, from which the heart shrank into a pea. It's surprisingly easy to say goodbye when you're only thinking about yourself, isn't it? She opened her mouth, intending to say something in response, but every word that came to mind stuck in her throat. It's not easy for me at all, Sakura squeezed out, feeling the blood rush to her cheeks. What are you saying? Kakashi raised an eyebrow skeptically and propped his chin up with his hand. Have you thought about your parents? They will understand and be proud. Their daughter will die as a hero and put an end to the eternal Tsukuyomi. The man chuckled coldly. And this fact is supposed to heal their pain? What about the unimaginable loss to the village? Tsunade-sama is certainly an excellent medic. But she shortened her lifespan too much in the war, using up too much chakra. Fifth is no longer a girl. Who will protect the village and heal the shinobi after her? We have plenty of wonderful doctors, Sakura countered. Okay, Kakashi nodded and filled the cups with drink again. What about me? The girl glanced at him quickly and turned away again, unable to resist the oppression of his heavy gaze. He still hadn't put on his mask. And the piercingly stern expression on his face made her feel sick. What about you? The kunoichi repeated his question. Kakashi handed her the glass and continued. That's exactly it, Sakura. You haven't thought about what it would be like for me to lose the last person close to me, have you? He hesitated for a moment. The girl held her breath. Father. Sensei. Obito. Rin. Naruto. Sasuke. Do you think this is a short list? No, but... I won't allow another name to be added there, Kakashi interrupted, no way. A heavy sigh escaped her lungs. Sakura felt uneasy, as if she had no right to see her teacher's soul turned inside out. Gathering her will into a fist, she slapped her palm on the wooden surface and said angrily. Who do you think it should be? Some unfortunate shinobi who miraculously survived the war? Or maybe one of the poor guys hanging on the damn tree? You yourself said that we have no right to decide for others. So why should someone be sacrificed without even being given the right to vote? Kakashi looked at her carefully. Then he drained his cup, wiped his lips with his sleeve and said. And again you consider me a scoundrel? Nothing of the sort. Sakura exclaimed even more emotionally, jumping up from her chair. The man chuckled. Well, yes. Yes. The girl almost screamed. I don't want you to worry about me. I've already decided and resigned myself to the need for a sacrifice. I don't need to convince you. I want to go to Sasuke and Naruto. To finish my ninja path with dignity and do something worthwhile. The victim, Kakashi repeated, as if savoring the word. And that means I have to become the executioner? It turns out that way, Sakura answered more quietly. And, in your opinion, living life is not as worthy as dying a painful death? Sakura cursed and pinched the bridge of her nose with her fingers. I told you that I won't let innocent people die. They won't have to, Kakashi said calmly. He then lifted the headband and looked at Sakura with a Rinnegan. Tomorrow morning you will take this eye, learn the technique and resurrect Naruto. Together you will dispel Tsukuyomi. And then, having been a little sad about our deaths, you will live the happiest life. And just try not to follow the order. The man closed his eyes and smiled warmly. After all, I am, in fact, still the captain of Team 7. And you are still a part of it. So get used to being an executioner. It is not so scary. An invisible vice squeezed Sakura's chest. No way, she whispered, feeling tears treacherously welling up in her eyes. This will never happen. Commentary on Chapter 6. Executioners and Victims. This chapter was hard to write, because we are on the threshold of the denouement. It's scary to think what will happen to my emotional state next. Enjoy reading, and thank you again for the feedback. I still can't believe there are so many of you read Heart. Chapter 7. Let's say goodbye tomorrow. Kakashi tried desperately to maintain a calm demeanor. And it seemed he tried too hard. Sakura even thought he was mocking her. But it was better than showing weakness again. The man felt something strange. More than anything in the world, he wanted to do two things: rip the Rinnegan out of his eye socket and throw it into the candle flame to throw off the oppressive weight of responsibility. And then embrace Sakura. Even though he had made his final decision, it was hard to believe in his own demise. Kakashi had always been prepared for death. After his death, Rin had even sought it out, desperately throwing himself at enemies in all ANBU missions. But this situation was different. What he was planning was like suicide. This thought made it even worse. After all, his father would inevitably break into his memories. The small candle flame made it seem as if stars were flickering and fading in Sakura's eyes. She was about to give in and stop pretending to be an indestructible rock. Let her. Humility never comes without sorrow. An ordinary girl who had too much to bear. The man understood and respected her resilience, but he couldn't give in to her. The decision to go to the chopping block himself was frankly selfish. After all, for him, it would all end quickly. And Sakura would have to live with it. But, oddly enough, this fact was his last ironclad argument if he had to argue with the student again. The girl meant much more to Kakashi than he did to her. And therefore Sakura would certainly survive. The man tried not to think that he was condemning her to the same torment that he had experienced when he pierced Rin with the Raikiri. He hadn't known how things would turn out. And now all the cards were on the table. 2 tears fell from Sakura's eyes onto the bar counter. Kakashi's heart responded immediately, clenching in pain. Love, a wild thought flashed through my mind. He definitely loved her, there's no point in thinking about it. But not at all in the way that people usually talk about this feeling. His emotions were much more complex and deeper. He wasn't attracted to Sakura. She was still too young, after all. But isn't it love if all you want is to wipe the tears from her face? Isn't it love when you desperately want to see her finally happy? Who cares what you call this heartbreaking range of feelings? It doesn't matter at all. You can't do that, the girl finally broke the silence. I can and I will, Kakashi answered. But. Enough. This is my order, so no buts. This is the end of the conversation. Sakura bit her lip and then, swallowing the lump in her throat, said. Why should I accept your point of view? After all, our arguments are the same. You haven't thought about me, have you? How will I live with this burden? Oh, girl. I know all your arguments in advance. There will be no winners in this game. But I'm still ahead. Kakashi glanced quickly at the girl's palms, then looked out the window and asked thoughtfully. Tell me, Sakura, why did you go home? She frowned for a second and then looked down, embarrassed. Change clothes, can't you see? The man chuckled, quickly touched Sakura's palm with his index finger and nodded. It's visible. And the small ink stain on her right hand is also clearly visible. Who did she write farewell letters to? In the silence that followed, he clearly heard a convulsive sigh escape the lips of the student. You don't have to answer. That's not the main thing. What's important is that you have someone to say goodbye to. A mixture of despair and fear was added to the grimace of pain on Sakura's face. And she, quietly sobbing, made one last attempt to tip the scales in this stupid argument. I can't handle the Rinnegan, my chakra isn't that strong. What if it doesn't work? What if, because of my mistake, the world remains in the eternal Tsukuyomi? And I? She hesitated and finished through her teeth, will I be all alone in such a terrible world? With each phrase like this, it became increasingly difficult to keep my cool. I would gladly hold your hand so that you would not have to carry this burden yourself, but stop underestimating yourself. You're not that timid 13-year-old girl anymore. Accept this as your duty. As another mission. There will be no other way. And there were no more objections to this argument. Kakashi poured the rest of the sake into cups and served the drink to the student. I believe in you, Sakura. I don't think for a second that you can't handle it. And if we're looking for something positive in our situation, I'm glad it was you who ended up here. After all, it's simply impossible to find a more worthy person for our mission. This was the last straw for the young kunoichi. She did not touch the cup and, pursing her lips, ran out into the street. Kakashi sighed heavily and finished his drink. He was proud of himself. If his emotions did break out, it would be much more difficult for Sakura. As it is, let her think that her teacher was going to die with a light heart. Sensei's words didn't just hit her head. His determination completely destroyed Sakura. There was no way out. The last word was his. She will need to kill Kakashi. It sounded like someone's crazy joke. And indeed, deciding on one's own death was much easier than accepting the teacher's sacrifice. Sakura was hot, despite the cold wind. She ran to a tree, leaned on her elbow and bent over, as if in sharp pain. Although, why as if? It hurt inside as if 1,000 shurikens had been stuck into her. First Sasuke and Naruto. Now Kakashi. How was she supposed to survive this? Choking on bitter feelings, Sakura fell to her knees and squeezed her eyes shut. She tried to remember herself being happy. Nothing worked. Just a week ago, life had gone on as usual. But it was as if it wasn't her life anymore. Footsteps were heard behind her. A sharp feeling of guilt burned Sakura's heart. And now, once again, she needed to be calmed down. A damned vicious circle of helplessness. Instead of lending her shoulder to the teacher who was about to leave her, she showed weakness again. Forgive me, Kakashi-sensei. Sakura blurted out. Please forgive me. The teacher came up and squatted down opposite. And then, a little surprised, he asked. And what are you apologizing for again? For weakness, the girl muttered. I hate myself. You are the one who needs consolation. Barely breathing out the wave of sadness that had washed over him, he said. Come on, I'm fine. Sakura gritted her teeth, trying to hold back the giant wave of pain and not let it spill out. But it was beyond her strength. Despite the circumstances, Kakashi still kept his composure. And even skillfully lied about I'm fine. Well, how bad was the situation if he called it order? Cold reason gave the right conclusions. If Sakura felt bad again, almost as bad as after Sasuke and Naruto died, it meant that the process of humility had started. An excellent sign. There would be no need to argue again. But the heart was not made of iron at all. And Kakashi gave in. Again, for another damn time, he reached out to the girl and pressed her breasts, experiencing painful relief. Sakura, as always, did not resist. This time she grabbed Kakashi's shoulders as if he was about to fall into the abyss or sink to the bottom. In essence, that's how it was. The man was already prepared to console the hysterical student. He put his hand on the top of her head and gently squeezed her pink hair with his fingers. But contrary to expectations, without a shadow of tears in her voice, Sakura muttered. Well, I wanted to say goodbye to you. That's why I invited you to drink sake. Only now my prepared words don't work. It's too early. Let's say goodbye tomorrow? Kakashi whispered. Sakura nodded and laid her head on the teacher's shoulder, burying her nose in the collar of his vest. She still hadn't cried. Was she holding back? Or were there no tears left in her poor, exhausted heart? The man closed his eyes and bowed his head, touching his temple to the girl's forehead. And suddenly it dawned on him. A dear heart. These were the words he would use to describe her. The fact that the storm of feelings had finally formed into something almost tangible made his soul feel lighter. You need to get some sleep before tomorrow, Kakashi said, not breaking the embrace. I'll walk you home. You'll finally get some sleep in your own bed. I'm not going home for anything in the world, Sakura said under her breath. We can spend the night here. Kakashi chuckled. So, we have any dwelling in Konoha at our disposal, and we will sleep on the grass? But his student didn't find it funny. We will. I don't have the strength to go anywhere. Don't leave me. Tomorrow, Sakura stopped mid-sentence. Okay, Kakashi said quietly, gently running his hand through the girl's soft hair, I don't want to spend my last hours alone either. For the second night in a row, the hugs acted like a sleeping pill on Sakura. The sake she had drunk also made itself felt. In just 30 minutes, she fell asleep. Kakashi carefully, trying not to disturb the fragile sleep, freed himself from the embrace. Then he took off his vest and placed it under the girl's head. For a few seconds, he peered into her face, listening to his feelings and becoming even more convinced that he had come up with the right definition. A dear heart. His dear heart. He was unable to sleep properly. Thoughts about the upcoming day did not leave his head for a second. In addition, the night's lodging turned out to be much less comfortable than the previous night. And so until the morning, Kakashi's only activity was to sit under a tree and look at the stars, then at the sleeping Sakura. A couple of times the thought crossed my mind that it would be nice to run home for, paradise. And that was even funny. Jiraiya-sama. I hope you wrote something new in the sky. I'll join you soon, don't let me down. As the first rays of light began to appear in the eastern sky, Kakashi lightly stroked his student's forehead. She opened her eyes, not realizing for a moment where she was. It's time, the teacher muttered and felt how much he wanted to stay alive. The girl didn't answer. She stood up meekly, glanced quickly at the rising sun, and turned to Kakashi. Sakura looked paler than usual. And then she said something that finally knocked the wind out of her sails. Is it time to say goodbye? After all, tomorrow has already come. Commentary on Chapter 7. Say goodbye tomorrow. Once again, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the colossal response. Your support really motivates me to write faster. And yes, sorry for such an abundance of glass. When I started writing, I assumed that it would be emotionally difficult. But I didn't think that it would be so difficult. And in the next chapter everything will be decided, let's keep our fingers crossed and stock up on valerian. Chapter 8. Types of silence Yes, Sakura. It's time to say goodbye, Kakashi said quietly, after a short pause. The girl nervously ran her hand through her disheveled hair and pinched the bridge of her nose with her fingers. She was very scared. Only not to part with the eye and experience physical pain. She was terribly afraid of what would follow. Let's get this over with quickly, the teacher suggested quietly and calmly, kneeling down. It's already the 4th day of the eternal Tsukuyumi. Many of those who ended up there were running out of chakra. We need to hurry, otherwise the consequences will be catastrophic. And, casting a quick glance up at the student, he took off the bandana and clutched it tightly in his hand. Sakura did not turn around for a few moments. A real storm was raging inside her, but she no longer had the strength to cry and beg. She suddenly realized that she respected her sensei too much to continue to contradict him. But the idea of choosing a random person as a victim no longer seemed so frightening and immoral. And that made her feel ashamed. But how can you live after doing this? At least Kakashi was going to leave of his own free will. Sakura turned and sat down opposite the teacher, who was still clutching the metal plate with the Konoha symbol engraved on it in his palm with all his might. May I take it? The girl nodded at the bandana. I'll need it now. Kakashi smiled slightly and muttered. The main thing is, don't attach much importance to this piece of fabric. And don't dare to remember today every time you put it on. Sakura didn't answer and silently reached for the protector, but as soon as she touched the cool skin of the teacher, she couldn't pull her hand away. The man looked up. The kunoichi stared at the bandana with unseeing eyes. And after a few seconds of hesitation, Kakashi placed his other palm on top and squeezed his fingers tightly. Sakura twitched slightly from the new touch. I I don't want you to leave, she whispered, still not removing her hand. Kakashi was silent. And the girl suddenly understood, why be shy if they had so little time left? With an unease she raised herself and reached for the teacher's cheek. He instinctively pulled away. The girl lowered her palms and muttered. I just want to remember your face. If you allow me. A short, nervous laugh escaped his chest. He took the girl's hand and placed it on his cheek. Sakura felt the touch of the fabric for a few seconds, and then carefully lowered it, revealing a handsome male face. And, hesitating for just a moment, she gently touched the stiff stubble with her fingers. At any other time, he would never have allowed himself such liberties. After all, something like that could easily harm Sakura. The age difference is 12 years. Besides, he is her teacher. But it didn't matter now. No one would ever know about their short farewell in the middle of deserted Konoha. Not a single living soul would ever know what extreme bitterness had raged in Kakashi's heart while that small hand was still warm on his cheek. Even if he wanted to, he simply couldn't pull away now. And then a crazy idea came into his head, which in his previous life the man would never have realized. It was akin to an obsession. Or a last wish. He quickly rose up, reached out to Sakura and kissed her briefly, immediately pulling away and not giving the girl a chance to come to her senses. She gasped, pressed her palm to her lips and blushed deeply. Sorry, Kakashi muttered. It couldn't even be called a kiss. A simple touch. He felt ashamed of this action. A stupid kiss would complicate everything for the girl. She would now think about it, remember. Idiot, nothing to say. I'm sorry, Kakashi repeated, it was an accident. Sakura looked at her teacher with still frightened eyes, unable to tear her hand away from her lips. She didn't know what to feel. Fear? Horror? Shame? Regret? But against this storm of emotions there was a simple desire, to prolong the feeling of their sudden closeness. And, realizing that there would be no other chance, Sakura decided to give in to the impulse. She shook her head, as if to bring herself to her senses, placed her palm on the teacher's cheek again and reached for his face. The girl was ready to swear that she could hear how quickly Kakashi's heart was beating. He obviously did not expect the initiative, but he also leaned forward and touched her lips again. This time the kiss was real, and it made everything inside Sakura turn over. The man touched the back of her head, pressing her even tighter to himself. For a brief moment, she forgot that it would all be over very soon. All possible words of farewell flew out of her head. And who needed them now? There was silence when Kakashi broke the kiss. He pressed his forehead to the bridge of Sakura's nose and ran the back of his hand over her sharp cheekbone. How many different kinds of silence had there been between them over these long days? Awkward, heavy, oppressive. And now it was that very silence that I wanted to prolong forever. The girl suddenly felt a lump of regret rise in her throat. And she muttered, I don't care about the world. I don't care about the eternal Tsukuyumi. Stay with me. More than anything, he wanted to agree. But his duty as a shinobi did not allow him to give in to his feelings, and so, gritting his teeth, the man stroked the pink hair one last time and stepped back. You know, this is impossible, he whispered and turned his gaze to the east. The sun had finally risen and was flooding Konoha with light. Sakura's heart sank. Could it really end like this? Why? Was there really nothing that could be done? Rinnegan, Kakashi reminded, pointing his finger at his left eye. The girl turned pale and looked down, realizing that the goodbyes were over. Naruto's image suddenly flashed in her memory. Would he allow a loved one to die of his own free will? No way. He would have scratched his head awkwardly, smiled broadly, and promised to cope. No matter how hard it was. Don't give up, Sakura. There is always a way out, the thought flashed through Naruto's voice. The kiss was still burning on the kunoichi's lips. She felt a little ashamed, because she had completely forgotten about Sasuke. No, of course, his death still broke her young heart. But this kiss. Like a small island of happiness in the middle of an ocean of sorrow. Sakura suddenly realized that she wanted nothing more than to experience such emotions at least once more. She cast a quick glance at her teacher. Kakashi took the scroll with the technique out of his pocket and studied it, frowning slightly. A strange pulling feeling appeared inside, which was difficult to describe, it was so deep. Sakura lowered her head and asked through clenched teeth. "Are you ready?" "Yes," Kakashi nodded, "let's begin." As always in such moments, fear evaporated, leaving a cold determination. The girl concentrated chakra in her palm and, gathering the rest of her will, tore out her left eye. A sharp pain pierced her head all the way to the back of her head. Hot thick blood flowed down her cheek. Sakura quickly got her bearings and pressed her palm, glowing green, to the empty eye socket. Kakashi leaned towards Sakura and looked at her face with concern. And again, that strange feeling in her stomach. The girl mentally scolded herself and reached her right hand towards the Rinnegan. Sensei's eyes were watching her. Sakura was ready to bet that there was something new in that always indifferent look. Some emotion that was transmitted through the air and practically felt on the skin. This tension drowned out all physical suffering. The girl ran her fingers from her temple to the eyelid above the teacher's left eye. The mad beating of her heart and the rush of adrenaline extinguished the sharp pain. "Come on," the man said quietly, "let's finish this quickly." Sakura took a deep breath, concentrated chakra in her hand and pulled out the Rinnegan. The teacher's face distorted and he closed his eyes, instinctively covering his empty eye socket with his palm. "Let me fly a little," the girl muttered. But Kakashi put his hand forward, making a stopping gesture and objected. "I'll be patient, finish with the eye." "Okay," Sakura replied and focused on her feelings. It is said that the power of the Rinnegan can drive a person mad if they are weak in spirit. Sakura did not know if her will was strong, but she was not afraid at all. She gritted her teeth and, filling her palm with healing chakra, inserted the powerful eye into the eye socket. The back of her head, forehead and temples were burned with such pain that the girl had never experienced. She closed her eyes and could not hold back a scream. "Fight!" Kakashi exclaimed, squeezing her shoulder hard. "You have to do it." But the pain did not subside. The girl felt as if her head was about to explode. "Damn it!" Sakura cursed and with incredible effort opened her eyelids. Tears mixed with blood and flowed like a stream onto his palms. His temples and eye socket were still throbbing, but the pain had become quieter. And the physical suffering was replaced by an incredible surge of strength. She looked at Kakashi and saw a stream of blue chakra. The teacher smiled warmly and praised. "Well done." And then he raised himself and tied the bandana on the girl's head the same way he always did for himself, covering his left eye. The girl's heart did a somersault from the next closeness. But Kakashi became serious again and spoke. "Edo Tensei is a complex technique. However, for a Rinnegan user, it's just another easy jutsu. So just read it." The man handed the student a sheet of information and continued, "This is, in fact, a normal summoning. Only a very unnatural one." Kakashi pulled out another scroll from his pocket and a small bottle of Naruto's hair. "That's it. We have the conditions for performing resurrection, the DNA of the person being summoned." He raised the vessel a little higher, and then pointed his thumb at himself, and a container for it. The girl lifted the fabric of the bandana hiding the new eye and read the short text. Indeed, a simple summoning technique. A convulsive sigh escaped Sakura's lips. She quickly looked around, her gaze catching on the creepy cocoons dangling in the wind. And then she was overcome with heat from a burning thought. Kakashi silently studied his student's face. Fortunately, Sakura looked better than expected. She had truly resigned herself to the inevitable, although she seemed a little confused. It was reassuring. Still, he didn't want to leave, seeing her in unbearable pain. He tried not to think about how his student would feel afterwards, and simply believed in the girl's strength of spirit. "Kakashi-sensei," the kunoichi began, "allow me to clear my head a little. This technique. It's not difficult. But it will be very difficult mentally. I need to get myself in the right frame of mind. Of course. But not for long. We've already delayed the mission too long." The girl nodded and stood up, moving on unsteady legs down the street. She walked only a couple dozen meters and stopped at the branch of the divine tree. He's probably thinking about how to get rid of this nightmare as soon as possible. Yes. The death of one shinobi is nothing compared to restoring peace. but suddenly Sakura turned around. There was some kind of wild, crazy determination in her eyes, which made the man's insides go cold with a bad feeling. "Forgive me, Kakashi-sensei," the girl exclaimed. And then, with the agility of a cat, she jumped closer to the branch, snatched the kunai and, while her intentions were still getting through to the teacher, she jerked the scroll open and threw the vessel with hair into the middle of the seal. The sound of breaking glass was heard. Another jump, and with a sharp movement Sakura cut the branch with the cocoon. And before the tree had time to grow its terrible unnatural flesh again, the girl folded the snake seal and exclaimed, "Edo-tensei." "No!" Kakashi screamed at the top of his lungs, rushing towards his student. But it was too late. Black ink patterns began to spread across the ground. Something similar to shredded sheets of paper began to stick to the cocoon. Kakashi's soul sank into his heels and he froze a few meters away from Sakura. She turned a guilty look to the man and pursed her lips. Tears appeared in her eyes. An unpleasant sticky feeling of disappointment began to spread through the body of the would-be victim. His student had just transgressed moral principles and killed an innocent person. Commentary on Chapter 8. Varieties of silence. I don't even know what to say. I hope you survived the stress and didn't have a heart attack. And another small question, I have a feeling that the work, contrary to my original idea, has turned into het, not gen. I don't know yet whether to change the direction. And as always, thank you for your comments on previous chapters. Your support warms my heart. Chapter 9. Interrupting infinity . Sakura still didn't fully understand what she had done, but she felt such pain as if her soul had been slashed with a knife. She had given in to a momentary madness and had not only acted against the will of her teacher, but had also entered into a battle with her own convictions. Excuses were on the tip of my tongue. Something stupid, like "I did it for you," or "I can't stand being your executioner." But such arguments were pure childishness, and reality mercilessly proved it. The girl sacrificed a man she didn't even know. Only for the sake of her own egoism. Sakura wanted to justify herself at least by the fact that Sensei remained alive, which meant the end justified the means. But he looked at her with a look you wouldn't wish on your enemy. There was a painful mixture of contempt, disappointment and disgust in his black eye. And so none of the arguments that came to mind excused her. "What have you done?" Kakashi asked hoarsely. The brief moment of silence before the technique ended seemed like an eternity to Sakura. The heaviness grew and intensified. She had no clear explanation for her actions. And so the girl simply turned her gaze to the cocoon. The resurrection was almost complete. Something that looked like ash and paper began to fall from the bandaged body, and the horrible wrapping cloth fell to the ground. Sakura's heart sank into her heels. This was something she hadn't really prepared for. It was one thing to bury a friend, quite another to see him resurrected. It was the same Naruto, only pale as the first snow, and covered in terrible cracks. As if his skin was made of porcelain. For several minutes, black eyeballs with blue irises stared unseeingly somewhere through Sakura. "Naruto," the kunoichi called quietly, trying to calm her frantic heartbeat, "can you hear me?" The guy twitched slightly, and then slowly turned his gaze to his girlfriend's face. Kakashi came closer and asked, "Naruto, do you recognize us?" Silence. The girl spoke, trying not to look at the teacher. Maybe the technology didn't work as it should? That's impossible. Kakashi glanced sideways at Sakura and added coldly, "I saw that you did everything right." The kunoichi bit her lip as guilt washed over her again. But she would think about shame later. There were more important things to do now. Finally, the boy spoke up. "Sakura-chan? Kakashi-sensei?" Naruto asked hoarsely, staring stupidly at his palms, covered in cracks. There was no more strength to hold back her feelings. Sakura sobbed, not believing that her dear friend, whom she buried with her own hands a couple of days ago, was now standing in front of her. "Am I alive? Am I seeing things?" Naruto raised his head and looked questioningly at the teacher. "Technically, yes," he answered affirmatively, "we really need your help." Finally, the guy began to understand. He carefully felt his face, hair, and then touched his chest with his palm, listening to himself. His blue eyes widened. It doesn't beat, Uzumaki muttered in disappointment. Kakashi walked up to his student, put his hand on his shoulder and spoke quickly. Naruto, you must help us dispel the eternal Tsukuyomi. It turns out that the tailed beast chakra in you is our last chance. Please pull yourself together. Sakura wanted to be as cold-blooded as her teacher. But it was beyond her powers. And so, casting aside all prejudices, the girl did what she desperately wanted from the moment of her resurrection. She threw herself into her friend's arms. He awkwardly hugged her and began to look around. How much time has passed? For days, Sakura answered, moving away a little. Her friend's skin was icy. It sent shivers down her spine and her hands began to tremble. The girl bit her lip to keep from bursting into tears right then and there. So you used the same technique that caused Madara and the others to appear. Naruto muttered, scratching his chin. We had to, Kakashi nodded. Naruto, Sakura sobbed, unable to resist her sadness. I'm so glad to see you. And she rushed to her friend again, burying her nose in his shoulder. This time he pressed the girl closer to himself. Sakura-chan, I knew you were crazy about me, his partner exclaimed with a grin. The girl pulled back and couldn't help but smile. Fool, she muttered, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. Naruto's gaze became sadder. Don't be sad, Sakura-chan. I will definitely help you and save the world. Well, I will still be able to keep my promise. He chuckled and scratched the back of his head. Naruto Uzumaki never goes back on his words, Databeo. Even after death. It was painful, unbearable, and wrong. By all laws, the dead should remain dead. And it seemed that the girl simply would not have the moral strength to survive this a second time. Even though she had several days to prepare and accept the inevitable. Still biting her lips, Sakura lowered her eyes and grimaced from the overwhelming feelings. Suddenly a hand, the cold of which could be felt even through the fabric of the cloak, covered the girl's shoulder. Don't be so sad. Dying, as it turns out, isn't so bad, you know. And by the way, can resurrected people become Hokage? Naruto put his hands on his hips and looked at the rock with the village leaders' faces, laughing sadly. For a moment, Sakura thought he had never died. She tried to smile back at him. Kakashi interrupted them and began to fill the guy in on the situation. We need you and Sakura to form a seal of reconciliation. And we met Kurama. It seems the fox wants to be sealed within you forever. Naruto suddenly became serious. He placed his hand on his stomach, where the seal that held the demon once was, and asked. Are you sure, Kakashi-sensei? Absolutely, the teacher nodded. Kurama no longer wishes to be summoned by anyone, and, even more so, to participate in a potential repetition of the story with the Ten Tails. Sakura glanced quickly at the man, surprised by his fortitude. What was he feeling now? Was he in pain? The mask of emotionlessness could no longer deceive her. Not after the feelings she had seen in the last 24 hours. Can you summon Kurama? Kakashi asked Naruto. I thought Lis gave you permission to summon, the Kunoichi muttered. He allowed it, but now I don't have the Rinnegan. And he didn't have such agreements with you. By the way, why does Sakura have an eye? Uzumaki raised an eyebrow in confusion. It's a long story that we don't have time for, the teacher snapped. Well, as always, Naruto said discontentedly and added, there's never time for the most interesting things. Okay, in that case, I'll enter hermit mode and try to detect the Kyuubi's chakra using natural energy concentration. The girl exhaled and listened to her feelings. It seemed that her powers were in place. This meant that Edo Tensei practically did not consume chakra. But there was no certainty that the impure world reincarnation would last long. While Naruto was sitting in the lotus position and using the inner concentration seal to enter hermit mode, she walked a few meters away and turned away. Everything happened so fast that there was no time to come to her senses. Besides, what was happening seemed like some kind of surrealism. Kakashi approached her and asked in a barely audible voice. So why did you disobey me, Sakura? The girl pursed her lips and turned her head further away. Let's talk about this later. What if your mother was there? Or your father? The teacher did not calm down. It instantly turned cold inside, as if a frost crust had formed on her heart. She hadn't thought about her parents at all. "That's enough, Kakashi-sensei," Sakura said quietly, "it's done. There's no turning back." And suddenly they heard a growing rumble. The student and teacher turned around abruptly. Naruto's eyes widened as well. There was no need to call Kurama, the demon found them himself. The fox quickly approached with graceful leaps, trying not to touch the houses and branches of the divine tree with his tail. "Kurama!" Naruto exclaimed joyfully and waved his hand in greeting. But it was clear from the Ninetales' gaze that he was not happy. When the fox caught up with everyone, he silently bowed his head to his Jinchuriki. "It's strange to see you like this," Kurama muttered in a deep voice. "Just don't tell me that you're sad about me." "Don't talk nonsense," the demon barked, then immediately softened. "We just work well together." "That's for sure," Naruto chuckled and extended his fist to Kurama. He folded his giant red fingers and returned the gesture with a slight smile on his sly face. "So, we'll spend eternity together?" the guy asked, smiling slightly. "It seems so," nodded the fox. The teacher asked in surprise. "How did you find us so quickly?" "I felt your chakra because I was close to Konoha. Once you resurrected Naruto, it wasn't hard to sense it." "Were you following us?" Kakashi raised an eyebrow suspiciously. The demon was a little embarrassed and answered with a rough tone in his voice. "I just wanted to make sure that Shikaku wouldn't try to be mean again." And, as if urging them on, a small piece resembling ash broke off from Naruto's shoulder and flew to the ground. Sakura's technique was imperfect, and therefore could not hold the soul of the summoned for long. "We need to hurry," the teacher spoke quickly. "Kurama, I'm going to seal you now." "I didn't know you knew sealing techniques," Naruto muttered in surprise. "I thought only my father could do them." "Don't forget, the fourth was my sensei," Kakashi smiled warmly. "Besides, I have thousands of different jutsu in my arsenal." Another small particle flew out of the crack on Naruto's cheek and, caught by the wind, was carried away somewhere into the distance. Sakura swallowed a nervous lump. The teacher closed his eyes, concentrated and quickly formed the necessary seals. And then he lowered his palm to the ground. From the fingers pressed to the ground, symbols simultaneously crawled in two directions. And as soon as they reached Naruto and Kurama, they formed a blinding glow under both. And then this unnatural light intensified many times, covering only one demon. At the last moment, Sakura saw the fox's triumphant smile. And a second later, Naruto's body was sucked into the Ninetales. The guy barely stayed on his feet, clutching his chest. The sudden movement caused another couple dozen particles to fall off him. "Naruto," Sakura muttered, "let's hurry." She came up to her friend again and hugged him tightly. How much she wanted to say. But there was no time for long goodbyes. "Please say hello to Sasuke for me. Wait for me. One day, Team 7 will be reunited again. Just don't rush, Sakura. Be sure to live a long life. And yes, if you become Hokage instead of me, I'll be very happy," smiled the friend. Kakashi also approached the guy and squeezed his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Naruto." "No need, sensei." The student answered cheerfully. "Don't be sad about us, Databeo. Otherwise, I'll be very sad in the next world. And I don't want to be sad anymore." And, coming closer to Sakura, Naruto asked a little more quietly and seriously. "Tell all of ours that I love them very much." And then he extended his palm to the girl with the index and middle fingers extended. The particles of the resurrected body fell from the boy's body more and more quickly. The kunoichi nodded, feeling a hot tear on her cheek. And she repeated the gesture, touching Naruto's icy hand. A short moment, and the branches of the cursed tree began to break with a deafening roar. The cocoons fell to the ground at once, raising dust and thunderous noise. "Goodbye, Naruto," Sakura muttered and made a toad seal to dispel the Edo Tensei. The body of his friend finally turned into gray, faceless dust. A bright glow and a clear, translucent silhouette appeared above the place where he had just stood. As if alive, Naruto smiled widely and looked at them with enthusiasm. And then, for a short moment, the light became so bright that it blinded his eyes. And then it disappeared forever. A sudden sense of emptiness washed over her, making it hard to stand. Around her, people were emerging from their cocoons, confused and disoriented. Sakura glanced quickly at Kakashi, whose face had suddenly become haggard as well. They did it. The endless dreams are interrupted. The world is saved. The kunoichi fell to her knees and cried bitterly. Commentary on Chapter 9. Breaking Infinity. My heart is broken after this chapter. Epilogue. Dreams of the past She had a terrible and realistic dream. As if she was standing in the center of her native village under the light of a blood-red moon. The branches of the divine tree surrounded her, almost touching the girl's cold skin with their vile flesh. Any minute now, the unfortunate kunoichi would have to make a fatal choice that would inevitably ruin someone's fate. Sakura was in a circle outlined in blood, along the perimeter of which stood potential victims. Father, mother, Tsunade-sama, living Sasuke, and Naruto, Ino, and the one she didn't want to look at, Kakashi-sensei. Who to choose? Who deserves to die? None of them, except herself. Once again, Sakura woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for air. Her heart was pounding as if it wanted to break her ribs. The girl mechanically pressed her palm to her chest, disappointedly convinced she was still alive. She reluctantly got out of bed, reached for the bandana on the bedside table and tied it so that the fabric covered her left eye. Kakashi, giving her the protector, asked her not to remember that very day. But it seems that nothing remains in her memory except October 14th. A shinobi's duty is to kill. But not like that. Not meanly. Not civilians. Sakura exhaled, once again resigned to the need to continue living. Getting up from the bed, she went to the mirror. In the reflection stood a stranger with a dull look. A strange combination, reddened cheeks, swollen from tears, and empty eyes. Or rather, eyes. The sight of the powerful purple ripples on her own face made her feel sick. Some in the village said that such a powerful eye should have been given to a more worthy person. Because after saving the world, Sakura wanted nothing more. And instead of persistent training, she simply hid from everyone. I think people call this kind of thing depression. Of course, she did her duty as a medic. Healing her wounds helped her cope with the first days after the end of the eternal Tsukuyomi. Sakura spent several weeks in the hospital. As Kakashi had expected, 4 days of sweet dreams turned into a real tragedy for many. Some of the survivors lost their minds so much that nothing could bring them back to normal. Others were exhausted to the limit and needed the constant presence of doctors. And, unfortunately, there were many doctors among these unfortunates. Many, due to wounds sustained in battle, did not survive Tsukuyomi and died right in the cocoons. Not a bad death, considering they left in their wildest dreams. But there were also lucky ones who, by some miracle, did not die from blood loss. And when everything returned to some kind of normal, the usual lively and stubborn Sakura was a thing of the past. The girl did not even remember what it was like to simply live. Fortunately, no one bothered her. Everyone came to the conclusion that a few months of rest would not hurt Sakura. Even her parents, despite their eternally worried looks, tried not to disturb their daughter. Unable to look at the hateful reflection any longer, the kunoichi went to the window. Every day, when she pulled back the curtains after sleep, she was most afraid that she would find a tormenting landscape with the divine tree there. But, fortunately, through the frosty patterns on the glass, only the neighboring houses covered in snow and bare trees were visible. The morning had just begun, and the sun timidly illuminated the native street. The first bright day in a long time. Winter this year was especially harsh. However, Sakura couldn't concentrate on reality for long. Every time she looked out the window, she began to see episodes from those fatal days. Tens of thousands of people died in the war. The bodies of many were never found. However, there was one very painful and unpleasant but. Only genin and a few jounin remained to defend Konoha during the war. Apart from them, there were only civilians in the village. And only one person among the common people went missing. Swallowing a lump of guilt that had washed over her again, Sakura sank to the floor and hugged her knees. Her gaze caught on the upside-down frame with the photograph she no longer dared to look at. that very picture of Team 7, when they were young and carefree. During her voluntary confinement, the girl had many opportunities to think about what causes the most severe pain. That Sasuke and Naruto are dead, or that Sakura herself as a person is dead to Kakashi? The teachers had chosen him as the 6th Hokage. It was one of the few warming facts. A kunoichi had saved him. But at what cost? Sakura avoided meetings, and Kakashi, it seemed, did not seek them. A lot of worries fell on him in his new position. It was said that the 6th did not leave the residence day and night, trying to bring order to the world. Among other things, among his merits was the Treaty of the Tailed Beasts. After long debates, the leaders of the great hidden villages agreed on the decision not to use the Kyuubi for their own purposes. Demons were rarely seen in different parts of the world, but no one dared to approach them. After all, they were now under the guardianship of the 5 Kage Alliance. After many hours of thinking, Sakura still couldn't fully understand her own feelings. She still missed Sasuke. But she realized, it wasn't love. It was a painful attachment and endless self-deception. As for Kakashi, everything was much more complicated here. He always took care of her, protected her. He was a second father to the girl. But after the kiss and her unworthy act, everything got so tangled that it was impossible to unravel it. And, in fact, Sakura was afraid to admit even to herself that what she wanted most of all was to run up to him and beg for forgiveness. But what forgiveness were they talking about? She acted like a coward. And no longer deserved respect. To distract herself from her heavy thoughts, the girl quickly threw on a hooded cloak and slipped out of the house while her parents were still asleep. Only in the early morning could she wander around Konoha. After all, the rest of the time she was reminded from every corner, Sakura Haruno is a war heroine. A great kunoichi who dispelled the eternal Tsukuyomi. The girl was seriously sickened by such speeches. No one was interested in the price at which the equipment was destroyed. Everyone was only interested in the outcome. And she, if she could, she would return to that very day and still do as Kakashi wanted. Even if I had to cope with much greater suffering, pain is better than a nagging feeling of guilt. Lost in thought, Sakura walked past the boarded-up windows of the Yamanaka flower shop. Her heart ached even more than before. Ino had never recovered from her loss. Because the only person missing in Konoha was her mother. Sakura felt disgusted with herself. Ino needed support much more than she did. To lose her beloved father in the war, and then to return to the village and not find her mother. But Sakura could not overcome the feeling of shame. The girl didn't know if Ino had guessed anything. The fair-haired kunoichi was looking for a meeting, came to visit, but Sakura's parents sent her away at their daughter's request. Another act unworthy of the title of shinobi. Overcome by a new wave of pain, Sakura turned away from the deserted shop and quickly walked through the crunchy snow towards the cemetery. Naruto and Sasuke were reburied in Konoha. Everyone thought that heroes did not belong on the outskirts, even such a famous one as the Valley of the End. However, the 6th Hokage ordered that monuments to her beloved friends be erected next to the restored statues of Madara and Hashirama. Sasuke and Naruto's stone hands formed the seal of reconciliation, closing over the river. At the very edge of the cemetery, Sakura saw a fragile, dark-haired figure standing at Naruto's grave. Hinata. Taking a deep breath, the girl moved between the granite slabs towards her friend in grief. "Hello," the pink-haired kunoichi muttered. "Sakura-san," Hinata answered with a nod. Hyuga's face was drawn and thin, and there were dark shadows under her eyes. It was clearly not easy for her. "Sakura-san, are you okay?" Hinata asked quietly. The girl smiled slightly and thanked. "Thank you. But I'm not worth worrying about. You better take care of yourself." The black-haired girl thoughtfully turned her gaze to the stone slab with Naruto's name and muttered. "I'm afraid I'll never be normal again. Naruto-kun was the sun to me. And now I'm doomed to live in the night. I regret that I never had the courage to be braver." Sakura had no answer to that. There was no point in hiding it, the endlessly cheerful blonde from Team 7 was the hope and support for many. But life had its own plans. "I'll go, Sakura-san," Hinata muttered, "I want to stop by Niji's place." The kunoichi merely nodded in response and knelt down before the graves. She removed her glove and brushed the dusted snow off the stone slabs, clearing away the family names. Sasuke, Naruto. If you were alive, what would we do now? Would we go on missions? Or would our paths diverge again? If they had been alive, the inner voice answered, there would never have been a kiss. Sakura bit her lip and closed her eyes. How would things change in that case? But at that very moment, the girl clenched her teeth, pushing away these thoughts. What was the point of these stupid thoughts about something that couldn't be changed? The fact is the fact, at the moment of farewell, she wanted to kiss Kakashi and she did it. And then she made a decision that ruined her life forever. A cold wind began to blow, driving dark blue clouds. After all, the weather in winter was so changeable. It was necessary to return home, so as not to run into anyone else. Perhaps one day she would have enough courage to return to the ranks and become useful to the village again. But that time had not yet come. Sakura stood up, shook the snow off her feet, and turned toward the cemetery exit. And suddenly her heart was slashed with adrenaline. Kakashi stood by the obelisk with the names of the war heroes engraved on it, looking straight at her with his one eye. He had begun to cover his empty eye socket with a bandana, as was his custom. Now the teacher and student looked alike. A convulsive sigh escaped her chest on its own. Sakura was not ready for a conversation. But there was nothing to be done, and she moved towards Sensei on wobbly legs. "Are you avoiding me?" the teacher asked without greeting when the girl caught up with him. "Not at all, 6th Hokage-sama," she muttered. Kakashi leaned his shoulder against the obelisk, put his hands in his pockets and chuckled. "You can call me as before. There is no need for these polite ceremonies." "Fine." Sakura had no idea what to say next. Although, in truth, there were dozens of words on the tip of her tongue. However, all she could do was listen to her own feelings and try to sort them out once again. And they were seriously raging. She remembered their warm closeness again. And painful emotions crawled in her stomach like thousands of insects. I'm so sorry, Kakashi-sensei," Sakura squeezed out, lowering her head. He sighed heavily and touched the girl's shoulder. The touch made her insides do a somersault. "What are you sorry about, Sakura? That you saved my life?" "No, you probably know." There, in the cocoon, was Ino's mother. Most likely, his chin trembled, and his chest felt heavy. The teacher was calm and focused. "Yes, I guessed about it. But you knew what you were getting into, didn't you?" "I knew," Sakura whispered. "So pull yourself together and stop blaming yourself. Accept your choice. After all, it can't be changed." It was incredibly difficult for Kakashi to maintain composure. The sight of his student being broken was unbearably painful for him. After Tsukuyumi, he decided not to bother Sakura and let her live through her grief. Besides, the girl was clearly avoiding him. After taking over as Hokage, the man had the idea to take advantage of the situation and drag Sakura into a conversation under the pretext of a mission. However, judging by the ANBU reports, the girl was in a very deplorable state. Kakashi wasn't grateful to her for saving him. However, he couldn't blame her anymore. He kept recalling Rin's death and came to the conclusion that Sakura was experiencing the same feelings he had after his friend's death. Even though his partner's pierced chest was essentially suicide, and the student had killed a person of her own free will, the parallels were drawn in his head by themselves. Besides, strange emotions were still raging inside after their farewell kiss. The memories of that moment were like a bone in the throat. And something had to be done about it. That's why he finally decided to see her. To figure himself out, and also to help Sakura get back to normal. And now, standing in front of his student for the first time in several months, he suddenly remembered the words that had come to his mind during their evening in Shushuei. "A dear heart," which was now broken into small pieces due to pain and grief. Sakura was shaking, either from the wind or from a terrible storm of emotions. Shame, guilt, sadness, and an unbearable desire to find comfort in the teacher were waging a serious battle in her heart. "I never told you about how Rin died. I think it's time." Kakashi suddenly spoke about his past. "Why did you decide to tell me now?" Sakura asked quietly. Through the mask it was clear that the man barely smiled. He stepped closer to the girl and answered. Because it's time. Let's go somewhere warmer. You're already frozen solid. And, having said the last phrase, Kakashi took Sakura by the hand. She was taken aback and looked at the man in fear. There was so much warmth, sympathy, and understanding in his gaze that tears began to flow from the girl's eyes. The man squeezed Sakura's hand as tightly as he could, and then led her away. And mentally swore that he would never let go of her hand again for anything in the world. And they would somehow sort out their feelings. Commentary on Epilogue. Dreams of the past. I can't even believe that I did it. I decided to post the epilogue right after the previous chapter, so as not to keep you waiting. It was a very emotionally difficult job. And now, finally, with a slight sadness, I put the status completed. Still, having written the last line, I decided to make the focus het, not zen. After all, the emotions and feelings of the characters played a huge driving role in the plot. And the last note is very unambiguous. Thank you for reading and commenting. Your support has become an endless motivator for me. This was my first experience in writing fan fiction. Before that I only wrote originals. Therefore, your participation gave me confidence that everything was done correctly. Thank you again, my dear readers.